Powerful gusts of wind drove massive thunderclouds across the sky, with only occasional moonlight breaking through. In the middle of the endless expanses of water covered with thick fog, a lonely boat floated with a traveler on board. A man with a large scar on his forehead wielded the oars with all his might without slowing down for a moment. The exhausted appearance spoke not only of fatigue, but also of the fact that the poison of acceptance had not long ago spread throughout the body. The traveler felt that he was about to lose consciousness. However, he did not forget that he needed to get to Handong as soon as possible. The man frantically put his hand in his pocket. From his pocket, he took out a golden tablet with an image of an eagle ready to grab its prey. Reflections were interrupted by a sudden exclamation. The man was found. A massive silhouette was visible on the horizon through the impenetrable fog. This at first surprised the traveler. Soon surprise gave way to panic. This brought the man to his senses and completely concentrated his attention. In the blink of an eye, a large sailing ship caught up with a small boat. Just a little more and a collision could not have been avoided. A black female hand with long golden claws appeared over the side. Its owner was surprised at how far the traveler could reach. A young girl with red eyes and white hair was sure that the man's resistance would end here and ordered him to surrender, to which he furiously jumped up from his seat and called her a damn bitch and refused to obey. At this moment, the effect of the poison made itself felt. Suddenly, the man began coughing up blood and the sweat did not leave his face. The man, falling to his knees, continued to cough. Looking at this, the girl, belittling all the efforts of the traveler, ironically suggested that it was now painful for him to even move, let alone resist. The insidiously smiling girl again invited the man to accept his fate. She wanted this like no one else, because a certain Mr. Jucho promised her a good reward. This greatly outraged the man. Accusing her of only wanting power, he called her a traitor. These words clearly hurt the girl, but she didn't even think of letting it mean it. With a smile on her face, she only ironically repeated the word traitor. She explained her motives only by saying that she was adapting to the situation and that the world was changing. Now the era of Mr. Jucho has come. Continuing, the girl said that the Surazo detachment, to which the traveler was clearly attached, no longer existed. He was not ready to hear these words. Overcome by sadness alternating with rage, the man squeezed with all his might the golden tablet that had been in his hands all this time. Having come to terms with the loss, the man hid the sign and said that if the girl had even a drop of affection left for her old colleague, she would not have treated him like that. At that same second, wooden boards broke under the man's feet and everything was enveloped in a bright light. The girl, surprised by this, could not utter a word and only opened her red eyes wide. The man was surrounded by unprecedented blue energy that caused splashes of water and fragments of a small boat to fly apart. Covering her face with her hand with golden claws, the girl could not believe her eyes and just continued to look at what was happening. A ball-shaped clot of energy formed in the man's right hand. It emitted something similar to small bolts of lightning. In rage, he shouted that this would be his answer. Having sent energy into a large sailing ship, it immediately partially shattered into pieces. The girl, barely able to stand on her feet, still couldn't believe that her opponent had so much strength left. She screamed that the negotiations had been disrupted and ordered her subordinates to immediately kill the man. Several warriors rushed at him at once, but he was ready to take the fight. In the province of Namha, in the kingdom of Han, morning came. The big blue sea delighted with its calmness. Only occasionally, small waves crashed on the rocky shore. Silence also reigned in one of the houses surrounded by a low fence. Suddenly, her peace was disturbed by the creaking of the front door, which was opened by someone from inside the house. Someone on tiptoe, clearly trying not to make too much noise, tried to walk along the stone wall. Suddenly, behind the unknown man, there was a young girl who displeasedly asked where he was going. With this unexpected question, she stopped the young guy who was already at the gate. The village boy, Jin Beck, was dumbfounded and could only turn his head towards the girl. He was embarrassed and understood that he had been caught. This girl was Jin Beck's younger sister, Midan. She scolded her brother for deciding to run away despite his grandfather's order to stay at home. The guy began to awkwardly make excuses by saying that the father of his friend Beckbong had died. Without listening to this obvious lie to the end, Midan sarcastically asked if this happened last month. The next question was no less sarcastic. She suggested that Beckbong had several fathers and asked his brother, to which Jin Beck, even more embarrassed, only scratched his head. Crossing her arms over her chest, the sister firmly said that this time she definitely couldn't leave and advised her to listen to her grandfather. This did not convince her brother and he continued to stand his ground. Suddenly, Jin Beck, with sincere joy in his eyes, remembered that yesterday a very cute mirror was sold at the market and offered to buy it for Midan. He also added that he could take caramels on the way back. This proposal clearly interested his sister, which was evident from her rosy cheeks. Jin Beck noticed this and rushed off. Medan only managed to say that he had no more than 3 hours to do everything. Before the guy had time to run out the gate, he immediately hit a tall man who appeared out of nowhere and blocked the way. Overcoming the pain from the blow, Jin Beck raised his head and saw a gray-haired old man with a beard looking down on him. The old man with a stony, menacing face was already holding a stick in his hands. It seemed that he was several times taller than the young guy, which made him nervous. Dripping with sweat and opening his eyes wide from excitement and fear, Jin Beck, stuttering in a trembling voice, could only utter the word grandfather. Immediately, the stony face of the elderly man changed to rage. Following the blow of the stick, the question was asked whether it was difficult to sit at home, as was said. Still with the same rage and scream, the grandfather suggested that the guy go hunting if he couldn't sit still, to which Jin Beck asked if the old man had a dream. In addition, he said that he did not want to do anything in the spirit of hunting. This only angered the grandfather more, who did not share the guy's ideas. The upbringing of his grandson continued. The old man was interested in where Jin Beck picked up such ideas. Midan, unable to help her brother, only watched from the sidelines, worried. Night fell. The sky became brighter with bright stars, but the sea still remained calm. Only the sound of the wind and rising waves could be heard. Sitting on the shore, Jin Beck sighed with annoyance, stepping on his eyebrows. Looking into the distance, he thought that his grandfather was still very strict with him, and he was no longer a small child. Jin Beck couldn't bear this life. Having been born into this world, he wanted to live an amazing life. He plunged into dreams, which lifted his spirits. The guy thought that by studying martial arts, he could become a strong warrior on a black horse. Also, traveling around the world, he would catch all sorts of scoundrels and thus gain his fame. Jin Beck continued to dream that his name would remain in history. Even the thought of this captured the guy's spirit. He jumped up from his seat and continued to dream. He could also save a woman who was in trouble from a scoundrel, and then the woman would beg Jin Beck to tell him his name. He would answer that his name is extremely worthless, but if she asks so, then it is his duty to tell her his name. With confidence and a smile on his face, the guy would answer that he was the fire dragon of the Jin Beck Heavenly Army. These thoughts lifted the spirits of the village boy. He believed that this was the beginning of the great warrior Jin Beck. The guy was so immersed in dreams that he did not notice the large wave approaching behind him. She immediately doused him with cold seawater and interrupted his fantasy, not allowing the guy to enjoy himself enough. And here he again stands alone on the empty shore, all wet from the sudden tide. Only after a while did Jin Beck come to his senses and realize what had happened. The guy looked at the sea with annoyance. He was immediately taken aback by what he saw. His eyebrows rose high in horror, and horror was visible in his eyes. Jin Beck looked at the lifeless body of a man with a scar on his forehead. Traces of blood were visible. He must have been washed ashore during that same tide. The guy was still in shock. Gritting his teeth, he just wondered what it was. Jin Beck asked himself if this was a man. A golden sign was sticking out of his pocket. The rays of the early sun illuminated the dim room. Faithful servants in identical clothes stood along the walls. Bowing their heads, they greeted the heavy-set man passing by. It was clear that by his very presence, he inspired fear in the servants, so they tried not to look at him so as not to attract unnecessary attention. Smiling widely, a bearded, stocky man with a massive belt on his stomach approached the door. Stopping for a moment, he was already anticipating his next action. Spreading his arms wide to the sides, he shouted with all his might, turning to His Majesty and asking if he had woken up. He continued to shout, complaining that one should not sleep when the country is in such a mess. This prank only made the roomers even more nervous and could not find any place for themselves. With the same cry, the man asked His Majesty to quickly get dressed and go out. Only one servant dared to tell the Chancellor, who was this stout man, that he was entering His Majesty's chambers, and that he could not behave like that here, despite the high rank of the official. The servant continued to say that such behavior violated the rules, but he quickly fell silent when the Chancellor's large hand grabbed his jaw. Easily lifting the insolent man with one hand, the Chancellor only looked at him with an embittered expression on his face. Gasping and sweating, the servant could not believe what was happening and tried with all his might to calm the Chancellor down. Still looking straight into his eyes with the same anger, the man asked the servant how he dared to raise his voice at him. Without waiting for an answer, the Chancellor threw the poor fellow straight into the wall, which caused a roar. The lifeless body of the servant fell to the floor, leaving behind only cracks and bloodstains on the wall. No one else dared to raise a voice. The Chancellor entered the chambers and addressed His Majesty, saying that he was concerned about the ruler's health, which was deteriorating every day. He invited him to go to the south for a short time to receive treatment, and assured him that there was no need to worry about affairs in the country. The ruler, without answering anything, was shaking and covered himself with a blanket. Hand on heart, the chancellor continued to say that since the reign of the previous king, sacrificing himself, he would do everything for the sake of the kingdom of Han and his subjects. These words did not at all reassure the servants standing nearby who had recently seen the death of their colleague. The chancellor, having received no answer, said that he understood everything and so be it. Already in the house we knew, with a thatched roof and a low fence, swearing could be heard. Grandfather, with a stick in his hands, chased after Jin Beck, reproaching him for not spending the night at home again and threatening not to make any more concessions. The guy, trying to get out of it, said that he accidentally fell asleep while he was lying on the seashore. Grandfather did not believe it and suggested that Jin Beck was fighting with someone again. As he ran away, the young man realized that he couldn't say that he had found the man's body on the beach, so he would definitely get an even bigger beating. The chase continued, and Medan, watching this, only sighed. It was clear that she was already accustomed to this. Finally, exhausted, the grandfather stopped the chase and called his grandson to him. Jin Beck was a little surprised. Handing the guy a bag of venison, the elderly man told him to take it to the butcher's shop. Jin Beck didn't really like this task and asked why he couldn't go to the shop himself. Without answering anything, the grandfather again grabbed the stick. The young man did not argue with this argument and set off on his way. The market was busy. There were many stalls bursting with goods. Satisfied customers were carrying bulky loads. Having reached the butcher's shop, Jin Beck gave the bag and received a bunch of coins. The seller also advised not to cause any more problems and return home as soon as possible. But he was in no hurry and was thinking of buying something tasty. In addition, the guy remembered the mirror for Meeden. Suddenly, the guy saw a crowd of people crowding nearby. Something happened. This interested Jin Beck. Joyfully, he pushed people aside and made his way closer to the scene of events. But his joy quickly changed to excitement from what he saw. An old man was lying on the ground with a small child crying over him. Grains of rice were scattered around. A fight was clearly brewing nearby. The big thug and several of his comrades were hovering over the stranger. The thug advised him to go where he was going and not to poke his nose into other people's affairs. One of the hooligans noted that their enemies seemed to be not local because they did not know him. These hooligans were known for their cruelty. Witnesses to this conflict only expressed condolences to the unknown man, and even the presence of a sword in their hands could not make them believe that he would win because there were 5 opponents. The stranger exhaled indifferently. He was calm and preparing to give his answer. Still with the same calmness, he replied that to defeat such pitiful opponents, he didn't even need a sword. The hooligans did not expect such impudence. They were instantly dumbfounded, trying to comprehend what they had heard. Confusion quickly turned to anger. Surrounding the stranger on all sides, all 5 rushed into battle screaming. The man, looking at the sky, exhaled again as if he already knew the outcome of this fight. The stranger bent his right arm at the elbow so sharply and clenched his fingers into a fist that a small wind arose. Within a moment, the man broke away from the encirclement of the bandits, leaving them behind. His face remained the same imperturbable. Only when the wind died down did the hooligans realize what had happened and were puzzled by it. Suddenly, one of the hooligans rolled his eyes and coughed up blood. The rest of the bandits followed his example. Jin Beck and the rest of the onlookers were amazed by what they saw because everything happened in a matter of seconds. Residents could only guess what just happened while the hooligans lay powerless. The man with the sword just stood and looked around the crowd. Someone was very frightened by his appearance. Jin Beck was shocked by this, but stood with his mouth open and eyes wide open, expressing his admiration. The stranger did not linger long as he left. He emphasized to himself how pathetic his opponents were. Suddenly, behind him, he heard someone address him. It was Jin Beck. He asked whether it was martial arts and whether the stranger was from Murim. After all, Murim is the world of martial arts. The guy continued to say that he was seeing a martial arts master for the first time and asked how to master it. The stranger turned his head slightly and looked indifferently at Jin Beck for only a moment. After a second, he turned away and continued on his way, which slightly puzzled the village guy. Jin Beck continued his futile attempts to get the man with the sword to talk by running around and asking questions, but it was to no avail. In his zeal to get answers, the guy got entangled in his own feet. He fell right in front of the stranger, scattering all the contents of his pockets around, which stopped the man. The fall and the scattered money turned Jin Beck's attention. I was collecting coins. He was only worried not to lose anything while the man silently watched this. Suddenly, the stranger was taken aback and showed at least some emotion. It was obvious surprise and misunderstanding. In addition to the money, a golden tablet also fell out of Jin Beck's pockets, which he quickly picked up. Having quickly collected all his things, the guy rose to his feet and with a smile on his face invited the stranger to have dinner at his home. The next moment, the man suddenly grabbed Jin Beck by the clothes. Looking at him from top to bottom, The stranger, with anger in his eyes, asked what he was up to. The guy, not understanding the question, simply remained silent. The man continued and asked where Jin Beck got this thing. Again, not understanding, he asked with excitement on his face what the stranger meant. The stranger still stood his ground and asked what the guy was up to and why he had this thing. Jin Beck could not answer anything. Still, he dared and asked what the man was talking about. He immediately replied that he was asking about the sign that Jin Beck was hiding. Being very frightened, the guy shouted that he was not hiding her and that the stranger could take her. The man considered him a pathetic weakling, but could not leave him like that. Slightly drawing his blade, the stranger told Jin Beck to speak directly, and if he lies, the man will kill him. The guy noticed this gesture and got even more scared. Standing on his toes and trembling with fear, he said that he had found a body by the sea. These words excited the man. Unpleasant thoughts entered his head and were reflected on his face. Having thrown them away, the stranger took hold of Jin Beck with renewed vigor and asked what the body looked like and what it was wearing. The guy remembered that the deceased was about 40 years old and had a scar in the shape of the letter X on his forehead. The stranger's worst fears were confirmed. Finally releasing Jin Beck, he asked what he did with the body. The guy immediately replied that he buried him in a windfall forest. After thinking a little, the man asked to take him there right away. A girl with white hair stood on the sandy beach and looked at the horizon. Out of nowhere, two inflicted appeared behind her and addressed Miss Shinny. Turning to them, she asked if they had found him, to which she received a negative answer. Mrs. Shinny thought that his body must have been nailed somewhere here, but he still hasn't been found, which means only one thing: he's still alive. She waved her hand sharply and ordered to search every corner of the village. Her order was immediately carried out. It seemed that the tall stems of bamboo rose to the very sky and blocked out almost all the sunlight. The stranger put his sword aside and sat down on his knees in front of the grave with neatly stacked stones on top. Jin Beck remained behind. The man's face expressed sadness and unwillingness to believe his eyes. Jin Beck explained that when he found the body, he was alone and did not know what to do. So he buried it in this forest. Only the sound of dripping tears broke the silence. Unable to bear this loss, the stranger rushed to the grave as if he wanted to hug her. The pain of this loss grew into rage. The fingers began to clench into a fist. Through tears, the man vowed to fight to the end, and no matter what it took to see Hucho's blood. Jin Beck, who had been nearby all this time, thought that he had already heard this name before. Wiping away my tears, the stranger thanked the deceased for his training and asked for forgiveness for misunderstanding him. As he was about to leave, the man took his sword and began to rise from his knees. Jin Beck, trying to stop him, said that he couldn't just leave. The guy noticed that the sun had almost set and it would soon be dark and offered to stay in his house. To this proposal, the man replied that he still had a lot to do. Without listening to the end, Jin Beck, with a smile on his face, told the stranger to follow him. Jin Beck thought that this was a chance for him to learn martial arts, which made the guy very happy. The stranger nevertheless accepted the offer, but said that it was only for one time. When leaving, they did not notice that they were being followed. It was one of Mrs. Shinny's servants. At this time, on the seashore, Mrs. Shinny scolded her subordinates for the fact that they still had not found anything. Suddenly, the same servant appeared behind her and addressed her. He also said that he did not find the man with the scar, but found Hundan. This news greatly surprised Mrs. Shinny with its unexpectedness. Her mood improved noticeably. In her usual manner, she said that they were looking for copper and found gold. Midan and her grandfather were sitting on the threshold of her house. They were doing their usual things. Suddenly, she heard a familiar voice that announced her return. A stranger and Jin Beck entered the courtyard and asked to prepare a portion of dinner for their guest. When Midan asked about the stranger, Jin Beck proudly replied that this was the one who would teach him martial arts. The grandfather, who was cleaning the gun at that time, turned his gaze to the man. The man smelled of an unknown danger. Having examined him in detail, the grandfather came to some conclusions. To finally confirm his judgment, the old man asked the stranger if he was connected with Muram, to which he received a positive answer. Without waiting for further explanations, the grandfather quickly walked towards the stranger and shouted, demanding that he leave immediately. Jin Beck grabbed his grandfather's hand and asked him why he was behaving this way, because he was just their guest. The stranger added that his visit had nothing to do with Murim, and that he came only because he was offered accommodation for the night. The old man, having calmed down a little, frowned and looked again at the guest, trying to find the lie in his words. He agreed that it was already dark and allowed the stranger to stay, but on the condition that the man would leave the next day. The old man was about to leave, but the man noticed something familiar, which shocked the guest a little. On the part of grandfather's chest that was not covered by clothes, a painful scar could be seen. While the relatives were arguing about what had happened, the stranger suggested that this scar could be a mark of spilled blood. He kept thinking about it. This mark meant that the person used martial arts, which means the old man is also related to Murim. The thoughts were interrupted by Jin Beck offering to show the stranger a room where he could spend the night and asking him to follow him. Only now did the guy have the opportunity to tell the stranger his name. He also asked what the man's name was. After a short pause, he replied that they would soon separate, and therefore there was no point in giving his name. Jin Beck clearly expected such an answer. The guy, maintaining a positive disposition, asked for forgiveness for what happened earlier and explained that his grandfather did not love Miriam, unlike him. Jin Beck asked the stranger to help him with something and told him about his dream of learning martial arts in order to leave his name in history. The stranger listened to the guy's stories about traveling around the world and saving people with obvious dissatisfaction. Finally, with a stern look, he asked the guy if Murim was just pampering for him. This question puzzled Jin Beck and left him puzzled. The stranger continued to look disapprovingly. Jin Beck asked, "What does I mean? I'm a stranger." Their dialogue was interrupted by a sudden scream that scared the guy. The voice belonged to Midan. She called her grandfather and brother. Not understanding what was happening, the guy and the stranger rushed to where the scream was coming from. Jin Beck continued to call Midan, but when they ran around the corner of the house, they realized what was happening. The stranger was shocked by what he saw. Lady Shinny greeted Handong. One of her subordinates held Midden with his hand over her mouth. Midan, with tears in her eyes, could not say a word. Jin Beck fell into a rage at what he saw and demanded an explanation from the uninvited guests. Shinny greeted Handong, emphasizing that they had not seen each other for a long time. The man was clearly not happy to meet an old friend. Jin Beck was overcome with rage and concern for his sister. Finally, the guy dared and rushed at one of the mistress's servants, demanding the release of Midan. With extraordinary composure, Shinny's subordinate swung his sword, sending a blast of unknown red energy towards Jin Beck. It seemed that she was about to achieve her goal and hit the village boy who did not even realize the nature of this power. At the very last moment, the hand of a savior and a voice calling Jin Beck appeared out of nowhere. It was the guy's grandfather who, with extraordinary dexterity for his age, pushed Jin Beck aside. Unfortunately, the old man himself could not avoid being hit by the same red energy that knocked the old man off his feet. Bloodstains stained the ground, and the old man held his chest and tried to overcome the pain, while Jin Beck unsuccessfully tried to understand what had happened. Every word was given to the old man with great difficulty. He only ordered his grandson to save himself. Grandfather fell from powerlessness, which completely unsettled Jin Beck. After everything that happened, Handun still remained calm, and turning to the guy, ordered him to do as he was told, but he would sort everything out here. The man abruptly stopped Jin Beck's attempts to object, saying that there was no place for children here. He also added that if something goes wrong, the guy could die. Jin Beck could not believe the seriousness of what was happening. This time, turning to Shinny, who was standing surrounded by subordinates, Handong calmly asked what she forgot here. The lady truthfully answered that they were looking for traces of a man with a scar on his forehead named Bipuchi, but they found Kandun. Shinny asked a counter-question whether Handong met with Bipuchi and whether they were looking for jade together. Handong did not like this question because it reminded him of his loss. Therefore, he did not answer anything. Shinny, realizing that she could not wait for an answer, threatened that she would force Handong to speak and grabbed Meeden by the shoulder. Bringing a sharp golden claw to the neck of the tear-stained girl, the lady said that now the life of this child depended on Handun's answer. The man coldly assessed the situation and weighed the pros and cons. He calmly asked Shinny to let the girl go, because this matter was only between them. Smiling insidiously, Shinny said that if Handun wants the girl to be released, he should answer the questions asked. The next moment, Shinny slashed her claws onto Midden's back, leaving deep bleeding wounds. Handong, who just now showed fear, could not expect this. Jin Beck was also afraid for his sister. Calling his sister, the guy was again about to rush forward despite the danger, but Handun got ahead of him. The man suddenly drew his sword, which left a trail of light with each swing. Swinging his sword, he sent streams of blue energy towards Shinny again and again. This did not frighten her, but rather amused her. She said that this was where she had to start. By swinging her claws, she also formed streams of energy that were already flying towards Handun. Two streams of energy met and exploded against each other. It seemed that the opponents were equal in strength. Shinny noted that Handong is still as strong as before. But when the dust cleared, she did not see her opponent. He literally disappeared, which was unexpected for Shinny. Realization came at the last moment. Handong attacked from above. A stream of energy was about to hit Shinny. The fact that Handong managed to catch the girl made her very angry. At the last moment, she was still able to repel her opponent's attack. This situation frightened the loyal subordinates, who were ready to go into battle on the orders of their mistress. But Shinny ordered not to interfere because Handun was only her prey. Bending over the body of his grandfather, Jin Beck watched the battle and could not believe what was happening. What he saw frightened and delighted him. He thought that how could people fight like that? And the battle was truly amazing. The opponents exchanged dozens of blows each, which were accompanied by loud sounds of retreating metal and a bright glow. The fight on equal terms continued for some time, but was nearing an end because one of Shinny's golden claws cracked from the load. In the heat of battle, Handong condemned Shinny's involvement of innocent people in the conflict and asked if this method belonged to Jucho. To which Shinny, confident that she was right, said that she would destroy anyone who stood in the way of Jucho, including Handun. He did not like this threat and became very angry. Having found a good moment, Handun swung his sword to strike a blow that would decide the outcome of the battle. This blow was so fast and strong that Shinny could neither dodge nor block it. Her main weapon, which were golden claws, completely shattered into smithereens. This surprised and frightened Shinny. This had never happened to her before, and the weapon did not let her down. She quickly retreated to a safe distance, leaving Handong behind. Unable to continue fighting, Shinny said that she wanted to deal with her opponent herself, but she did not have much time. With just one snap of the fingers, her top warriors prepared to attack the enemy of their mistress. Handun had already prepared for battle with an enemy that outnumbered him, but suddenly he looked away. Jin Beck sat on his knees over the bloody body of his sister and called Midan. Handong thought that if he hesitated, the life of this child would be in danger. He thought that he had to do everything quickly. Handun extended his hand and began to concentrate energy in the sword, from which it began to glow. In addition, he assumed the correct foot stance. These actions were crowned with success. Handun's body was enveloped in energy from all sides. The outline of a snake was visible. Shinny, looking at this, could not believe their eyes and were in shock. Jin Beck was also surprised by what was happening. He had never seen anything like this before. Shinny immediately turned to her subordinates and said that Handong was preparing something and they couldn't let him finish. But Handun managed to grit his teeth and prepare to attack. An incredible stream of blue energy in the form of a serpent instantly pierced several opponents. This technique was called Blood Dragon Strike. Getting closer and closer to the main target, the energy in the form of a snake opened its mouth as if trying to eat Shinny and her warriors. Having no other choice, a frightened Shinny ordered everyone to run. They managed to dodge in time and avoid the blow. The stream of energy did not stop moving and hit the rock with a roar. The rock survived, but everything was covered in cracks. Not a trace remained of the blue energy. Shinny was amazed by the impact of the blow and emphasized that it was dangerous. Looking at Handong, she sarcastically said that she was sorry because it was supposed to be a transformation attack. But suddenly the rock began to make a crashing sound, which Shinny couldn't help but notice. Looking up in fear, she became numb because boulders of stone were flying right at her. Within a second, there was a terrible roar and dust rose. In the place where Shinny and her subordinates were now, there was a pile of stones. But Handun did not relax and kept his sword at the ready. Jin Beck, who stood behind, also did not relax because he could not believe that it was all over. The village boy could only hear about what he saw. This was martial arts. Handong was still at the ready and humbly stood in a fighting stance, holding his light-emitting sword tightly in his hands. Jin Beck couldn't believe what he saw. He could only hear about this, and it was martial arts. Finally, Handong realized that the threat had passed and breathed a sigh of relief. A moment later, he walked towards Madan and ordered Jin Beck to quickly seat her. Sitting down next to her, the man began to examine her wounded back while Jin Beck stood there, not understanding anything. Suddenly, Handong's hand began to glow with a blue light. He brought it to Midan's wounds. At that same moment, a mysterious energy enveloped her body. This went on for a while. Handong was completely focused on this. For a minute, Jin Beck doubted that this was happening in reality and not in a dream. The surprise on the guy's face changed to sadness. He examined his sister's bloody back and realized that martial arts were not at all what he had imagined. The unconscious grandfather lay nearby, and there were no signs of life in the basement. Near his home, there was devastation. Everything was stained with blood. This convinced us even more that martial arts were cruel. Suddenly, there was a loud cough. It was Grandpa. He finally came to his senses. Coughing and trembling in pain, he approached Midan Jin Beck and asked if he was okay. Handong said that the old man need not worry because he transfers energy to her and draws out poison from the wounds. The old man continued to beg to save Midan and said that if they had time, they could still fix everything. Suddenly, Handong and Jin Beck turned their attention to a pile of stones. Shinny was rising from under the rubble. As if nothing had happened, she stood up and said with a smile that Handong's skills were not enough. Although he tried, she began to put on new gloves with claws, preparing to continue the fight. Handun became nervous because he was not ready for this and he had no time for another fight right now. Shinny said that he could help the girl, but if he took his hands off her, they could both die. Shinny's left hand was covered with green energy. She continued to say that she could not be dealt with just one blow because she was not as pathetic as Handong thought. Green liquid began to drip from the tips of her nails. Shinny added that she, like Handun, was no longer the same as she was before. After these words, she rushed towards the man. Handong could only sit quietly in place for fear of harming himself and Midan. In a fit of despair and understanding of his powerlessness, the old man shouted no. Only Jin Beck could somehow influence the situation. Suddenly, a loaded gun appeared in his hands. He quickly took aim and shot at Shinny, who was almost close to Handun. The bullet, cutting through the air, almost hit the target. Shinny clearly didn't expect this and froze in place. She managed to cut the bullet in half with one wave of her hand, thereby stopping it. Jin Beck became nervous because this attempt was unsuccessful. He quickly sent the gun to reload while Shinny came to her senses and asked who he was. Handong began to dissuade Jin Beck, saying that it was dangerous, but the weapon was already ready to fire again. Trembling with fear and excitement, Jin Beck took good aim again. Shinny, demonstrating her claws, said that it was useless and that such pampering would not cope with her. She waved her hand and sent several streams of energy towards Jin Beck. The guy, already knowing about the destructive power of these flows, tried to jump to the side. But still, the yellow energy wounded him in the back. A moment later, there was a loud explosion and a cloud of dust rose. The old man screamed in horror, calling for Jin Beck. The guy was lying on the ground, crushed by a pile of stones. Traces of blood were visible. Trembling in pain and dripping with sweat, he tried to get up, but his body did not obey. There was despair in his eyes because of his inability to help even himself. Shinny told the guy not to go where he shouldn't and turned around and headed towards Handun again. He continued to sit next to Madan, who still had not come to her senses. Looking at his sister, Jin Beck could not come to terms with his powerlessness. With a trembling hand, he tried to reach for the gun, saying that something needed to be done. Strong feelings about his sister, who was in danger, turned into his hand being covered with yellow energy, and when he reached for the gun, it began to be transferred to the weapon. Imagining a sharp claw to Handun's throat, Shinny once again asked if he would return to Mr. Jucho. For the right choice, she would allow him to heal the child. Waiting for an answer, she ran her sharp claw a little along her neck, causing blood to flow, but Handun did not react to this. The warrior endured the unpleasant feelings and did not react in any way. After a moment, he looked up at Shinny and answered without the slightest doubt that he would rather die than swear allegiance to this bastard. Such a categorical answer only angered Shinny even more, but she accepted it, saying that it was Handong's will. Her hand was again covered with green energy. Raising her hand with extraordinary pleasure, she said goodbye to her opponent and was already looking forward to a quick victory. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a bright yellow light flashed. It was so bright that it blinded Shinny's eyes. The source of this light was behind the woman, and a loud sound was also heard from there. Jin Beck was also located. A second later, a huge stream of energy was released, illuminating everything around with its radiance, and exploded upon reaching the rock. Surprised, Handong and the old man looked toward the source of this light, which became noticeably smaller. It turned out to be Jin Beck, who was holding a weapon in his hands. The yellow energy seemed to evaporate from the guy's body. Sitting on one knee and not releasing the weapon, he heard a click in the barrel. He immediately understood what was going on and was annoyed. The next moment, the gun in the guy's hands exploded. He was thrown back and nailed to the ground. Shinny looked at the rock that the stream hit and was surprised that the boy was able to fill an ordinary gun with energy. She turned around sharply and looked at Jin Beck in surprise. Blood could be seen on her cheek. Shinny thought that the guy was gifted. She approached him, and looking down, realized that he was more dangerous than she thought, and if he was not killed, he could become dangerous for Mr. Jucho. She decided to finish off Jin Beck here and now, but someone's voice stopped her. Behind Shinny, holding his wound and leaning on the fence, stood an old man. It was his voice. Grandfather held on with all his strength. His appearance was terrifying. Barely dragging his feet, he remembered that Shinny said that they needed jade, then they should go after it. Looking at her with a stern look, he said that there was no divine jade here. Handong and Shinny were shocked that this old man knew something about divine jade. Looking with a stern look, the old man said that there was no divine jade here. Handong and Shinny were shocked by what they just heard. Without hiding her surprise, Shinny asked several more times that the old man was talking specifically about divine jade. He confidently confirmed this. Shinny, looking at this helpless grandfather, thought only about how he could know about jade. Finally, she assumed that the old man was just talking all sorts of nonsense just to save his own skin, because this is not something that the inhabitants of this wilderness can know about. To these words, grandfather only remained silent, pondering his further answer. Finally, he asked if she knew about Dahyapsa. This question again stupefied Shinny and Handong. Straining her memory, Shinny clarified whether this was the place that had been destroyed by a demonic cult decades ago, and asked why the old man was suddenly talking about it. Collecting my thoughts, grandfather began to give his answer. Hand on heart, he confidently said that he knows so much because he is the last survivor of Dahyaps. This answer again shocked his listeners and especially Shinny. It was difficult for her to believe this. She again accused the old man of lying because she had heard that every single one of them was killed in Dahyopsa. She continued that Dahyopsa was the second most powerful after Shaolin, and that she could not easily defeat an experienced master from Dahyopsa, and then hit the old man with a stream of energy. To this, the grandfather bared his chest, showing many scars, among which the one in the middle stood out. He added that decades ago he lost his martial arts. Speaking about his scar, the old man explained that it was proof of an oath that they would never interfere in Chunwan's affairs again. Shinny only listened in fascination. The old man continued to speak and said that according to legend, Shin Seonggi created 8 divine jade beads. Even one bead gave its owner powerful power. And Dahyopsa was studying this legend. Research materials called the Miracle of the 8 Jades were passed down in the temple from generation to generation. However, after the attack of the demonic cult on the temple, the only person who knew anything about the Miracle of the 8 Jades was the old man himself. Grandfather also noticed that earlier Shinny had talked about Jucho and suggested that she was going to collect and give the jades to him. Shinny was surprised by the old man's knowledge. After taking a few steps, he continued to say that by entrusting such a task, Jucho literally forced him to look for a needle in a haystack and suggested that Shinny still did not know much about jades. Looking at her with a calm but quite rightly menacing gaze, the old man proposed a deal. Standing opposite Shinny, he offered to take her to the jades if she didn't touch his grandchildren again. Shinny was surprised by this offer. The old man asked if this was not a good deal, but she continued to doubt and was lost in thought. She thought that if he knew such details, then most likely he was not lying. She was also embarrassed by the feeling of intimidation that came from her grandfather. This caused goosebumps on her back, but she had already decided on her further actions, which made her smile. Putting her hand into her sleeve and looking for something there, she replied that this was a very tempting offer, but she still could not believe him. Therefore, the old man must swallow something. She extended her hand to him. This puzzled the grandfather for a moment. She explained that this is a pill of blackening sleep, and if the old man does not keep his word, he will die from pain reminiscent of insect bites all over his body. She considered that this was a necessary precaution. She continued and said that if it turns out that he was lying, then eventually his grandchildren will die. The old man thought for a while. Asking him to keep his promise, he swallowed this pill. Shinny said that he needn't worry about it. Handong continued to treat Midan. He was clearly nervous from what he saw, but did not say anything. He blamed himself for what happened, thinking that if he had not let his guard down, then everything could have been avoided. Passing by Khandun, the old man said that he was very ashamed that he treated him so callously and said too much. He asked if Handong could take care of these children, and asked Handong to do this for him. Khandun just had to fulfill the request. Looking at Jin Beck, who was still unconscious, the old man asked him for forgiveness for not revealing the whole truth, and told him to live with dignity even if he was not around. Leaving with the old man, Shinny turned to Handong and said that she was sorry because she planned to settle scores with him today. Handong ignored these words. She added that in the end everything is the will of heaven. Handong silently watched them go. Shinny said goodbye and said that someday they will meet again if their paths cross again. Handong turned away, feeling guilty. The night gave way to morning. The scene of recent events was illuminated better than the early sun. Jin Beck came to his senses as if from a bad dream. Remembering what happened, he was scared. In a panic, he suddenly jumped up from his seat. Midan was still sleeping next to him. Jin Beck looked at his sister and was happy to see that she was alive. Then he turned his gaze to Handong, who was sitting silently on the threshold of the house. He also looked at Jin Beck. The light of the sun illuminated the man's face. He was calm, but his gaze expressed sadness. This sight of Handong frightened Jin Beck. He was already anticipating something wrong. The sun rose higher and higher, and its rays played briskly across the sea. Walking along the sandy shore, Handong conveyed his grandfather's words to Jin Beck and told him that he and his sister should live with dignity. The story he heard upset the guy. He was silent, thinking about what Handun had said. Finally, he decided to ask Handong standing in front if everything would be okay with his grandfather. He replied that Yucho wanted to get the power of Jade, and that even with this hint, they would not be able to harm him. Then Jin Beck asked what would happen to Grandpa when Jekko got what he wanted. Hearing this question, Handong stopped abruptly. He didn't answer anything because everything was clear, and without words, Handun just stood silently. Although Jin Beck did not receive an answer, he himself understood everything. Unable to accept this reality, he was furious and sorry for his fist. After which he fell to his knees, realizing his powerlessness. Handong did not dare to say anything else. Suddenly, Jin Beck turned to Handong and clarified that he was also looking for Jade. Placing his hand on his chest, the guy asked to take him with him in search of Jade, explaining this by the fact that by meeting Jucho, he could save his grandfather. Recalling the terrible footage from last night, Jin Beck said that after fighting with someone from Murim for the first time, he felt that he would do everything possible for the sake of his family. The guy continued to blame himself for the fact that Medan and grandfather suffered because of him. At that moment, a tear fell on his trembling hand. Handong tried to cheer up Jin Beck by saying it's not his fault, but the guy didn't agree with that. The tears had already disappeared down the guy's cheeks, but he continued to say that if he had been stronger, he could have saved Medan and his grandfather. Therefore, he asked Handong to tell him how he could become stronger. The guy's determination made Handong think. He closed his eyes and lowered his head slightly, resigning himself to the guy's mood. Passing by Jin Beck, who was sitting on his lap, Handong reminded that Murim is not a place for children's pampering. Gradually moving away, he added that there are people who are much stronger than those he saw earlier, and that the guy will see people who are dying like flies. He himself can become one of them. Finally, anticipating the correct answer, Handong asked if Jin Beck was ready for this. Jin Beck thought about these words but still continued to cry. Finally, making the last connections, he replied that it was better to die than to be unable to protect the people dear to him. The man was pleased with this answer and told Jin Beck to call him Handong from now on. The bird, cutting through the air with its wings, quickly flew to the man already waiting for her. It was a carrier pigeon. It obediently sat down on the fence and began to wait for its owner. There was a small letter tied to the bird's paw. The chancellor began to read it carefully. Within a moment, his face broke into a smile. The letter talked about the miracle of 8 jades. The chancellor was surprised that jades were secretly studied in Dahyopsa. He was glad because Shinny had done something useful after all. A timid servant appeared behind him and said that His Majesty had arrived safely in the south. But the chancellor was not so interested in this news. He remembered the south where it is full of the smells of flowers, warm and good. Breaking into an insidious smile, the chancellor burned the letter in his hand and thought that it would be good for the young king to end his life in the south. On his chest was a necklace of white pearls, among which a dark purple sphere clearly stood out. In the lifeless desert, emptiness reigned. In the distance, several silhouettes could be seen. One of them was pulling a large load behind him. Jin Beck was sweating, overcoming himself. He had been dragging a huge boulder behind him for a long time while Handun was walking lightly. The guy asked if he had to go exactly that way, to which he received an affirmative answer. I continue to struggle with the weight of the stone, Jin Beck, that he may soon lose consciousness. Handong responded that in martial arts nothing happens on its own because persistent repetition is the basis. He also sarcastically asked if Jin Beck stopped wanting to become stronger, to which the guy continued to work hard. Jin Beck thought that since this was the case, he needed to try his best. He now had nowhere to return because he left Midan in Bekbong's house. Handun initiated his companion into further plans. First of all, they need to go to Anmundsen. It was there that Handun planned to go along with his elder, a man with a scar on his forehead. But he did not know what to do next. In any case, it was somehow connected with Jucho. Jin Beck, shaking with fatigue, noticed that the name Jucho was familiar to him from somewhere. Handong said that he understood the post of chancellor in the kingdom of Honorable. Continuing, he said that it was Hucho who poisoned His Majesty the late king. This surprised the guy. Handong added that the chancellor was not always so soulless. He helped the late king and guided him on the right path. He also had good relations with Surazo, His Majesty's military unit. Handun knew this because at the same time he began training in Surazo. Continue the story. The man said that everything changed when Jucho received an unknown bead. On that day, the former chancellor evaporated. He began firing with an unknown technique, causing everything to burst into flames. There were many casualties. His power was overwhelming. From then on, he began to show a desire to control the whole world, and at the same time, he began to destroy the closest circle of His Majesty the late king. This circle included Surazo. Handong concluded that in the end, the Surazos fell apart. Looking back, the man realized that Bustina was one of the divine jades. Handong clenched his fist and became angry, remembering that the young king was now also in danger, just like a candle in the wind. He had already firmly decided that in order to deal with this, he needed to reassemble Surazo and revive the lost royal power. The pathetic speeches did not impress Jin Beck, who was still dragging a huge boulder behind him. Handong said that there were still 30 miles left to go, which clearly did not encourage Jin Beck. He asked if this was too much for a beginner. To this, Handong reminded him of perseverance. After these words, the guy resigned himself again. Handong quietly glanced at Jin Beck. He, looking at how the young man continued to work hard, thought that he just wanted to check how long he would hold out. but the boy still remained conscious. He also remembered how, in a fight, Jin Beck used energy to shoot a gun. It was obvious to him that he was an unusual boy. Some more time passed. Jin Beck fell to the ground from powerlessness and tried to catch his breath. He could no longer walk, but Handong made him happy by saying that they had already arrived. The guy gathered his last strength and tried to look around. He saw a huge decorated square with a lot of people. Some were carrying bulky loads, some were running errands, and some were just walking. Jin Beck liked this sight, but the next moment he saw someone reaching out to him. The stranger took Jin Beck's hand, trying to help. The guy was ready to thank him, but froze in mid-sentence. A seemingly good-natured man asked Jin Beck if everything was okay with him, but the guy could not answer him because he was fascinated by the sight of a previously unknown horned animal. Handong explained that since Anmunseong has a stable political environment and a convenient location, it is a popular place of residence for Westerners, which is why some of the animals are so outlandish. Next, Handong called out to Jin Beck and said that he knew a place here. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a clearly wealthy man appeared. He was sitting on a stretcher carried by several servants. Confetti was flying everywhere. Musicians walked ahead of the stretcher, and order was guarded by several soldiers. Local residents vigorously greeted the man, calling him Mr. Mayor. It was the mayor of Anmunsen, Mr. Yupyo. He cheerfully greeted the residents who were very grateful to him for his work. Jin Beck first asked what was going on there, said that he was hungry and suggested going somewhere to eat. Handong was overshadowed by something. One of the mayor's servants stood not far from the buffalo. The animal carefully looked at the red fireworks that the servant was holding in his hands. The next moment they began to sparkle brightly and make noise, which attracted the buffalo's attention even more. Frightened, the animal began to become ferocious and tried to escape while its owner did not understand why he suddenly became like this. Still, the owner of the buffalo could not hold the rope. The enraged horned animal, its red eyes sparkling, rushed at the duck, knocking passers-by off their feet. The buffalo headed straight for the mayor's stretcher. Mr. Yupa froze in fear. But suddenly, a man appeared out of nowhere. He stood firmly at attention while angry animals rushed towards him. Suddenly, an unknown blue energy began to concentrate in his right hand. With one deft movement, this man directed energy into the buffalo, which was already very close. This calmed the animal. There was no trace left of the red eyes. The man looked at the buffalo as if he was condemning him for making him tense up so much. The man with an indifferent look stood with his hand outstretched, and the remnants of that same energy dissipated around him. Witnesses to this action were delighted. They thanked and praised Mr. Isaac. After receiving the honors for a short time, he asked the people standing nearby which of them was the owner of the buffalo. Having received an answer, he said that animals should not be brought into places where there are so many people. The owner apologized for this. Jin Beck and Handun were no less surprised than the others. The guy was interested in why the animal was not hurt because it was martial arts. And Handun was thinking about how a person skilled in martial arts could end up surrounded by the mayor. The crowd continued to praise Mr. Isaac for his feat, but it was clear that he did not care about their opinion. Without being arrogant and remembering his duty, the man quickly turned to the mayor and asked if everything was okay with him. Joyful Yupe replied that everything was fine. Keep smiling. He said that thanks to him he will be able to go on patrol calmly, and added that Isaac is a reliable person. Only the praise of his master caused joy in the man's eyes, but without losing his composure, he said that the mayor was increasing. Only after the order to leave did the services carry the stretcher forward. Jin Beck and Handong, along with the rest of the townspeople, watched Yupyo go. Handong was still troubled by what he saw in the market square. Jin Beck asked if Handong knew a person who had recently used martial arts. He did not answer the question and, throwing a small bag into his hands, ordered the guy to go to the guest yard. Having said that he would return soon, Handong quickly ran away after the mayor, leaving Jin Beck, who did not understand anything, alone. Holding a small bag in his hands, the guy was a little taken aback by surprise and, shouting after him, asked how he could throw it like that and what he should do here alone. Finally, opening the bag, Jin Beck saw many gold coins that sparkled in the sun. This lifted the guy's spirits. He thought that while he was alone, he could do whatever he wanted. There were quite a lot of visitors in the restaurant, but there were still empty seats. Someone was drinking, someone was already eating, and someone else was just placing an order. Finally, the order that Jin Beck had been waiting for was ready. The caring inn worker placed the plate right in front of the guy. Before eating the food, Jin Beck examined it with admiration and concluded that it looked appetizing. Wishing himself a bon appetit, the guy began briskly gobbling up his order piece by piece. Still in the same restaurant, an inconspicuous old man with a gray beard drank his alcohol. After emptying the glass, he placed it on the table with a crash. The visitors sitting nearby were surprised at this old man. A bald, elderly man held a glass in his hand and, shaking an empty bottle, demanded another one, which was far from the first. The same elderly man sitting next to him, laughing, asked his interlocutor if he had drunk too much and suggested that he stop already. The bald old man replied that this could most likely be said about the questioner. Visitors looked at the old people and wondered how much they were drinking. He even began to place bets. Someone said that they had been drinking since the day before yesterday, but people did not believe it because an ordinary person would have died long ago. Jin Beck had already eaten by this time and also tried the drink. He liked it very much. He asked for another bottle and one chicken. In this commotion, a new visitor entered the restaurant. His eyes were hidden by a large straw hat. He sat down quietly in one of the empty seats. The unknown person approached the restaurant worker and asked her to bring him a plate of mandu, but she did not hear him. He calmly repeated the order, but because of the noise, she again did not hear him. This angered the unknown man in the hat. He raised his hand and shouted loudly to bring him a portion of mandu and a bottle of baijiu. The bald old man sitting behind him was startled by surprise. He dropped his glass of alcohol, which fell on the table, and the contents spilled. He was saddened by this, unlike his interlocutor, who began to laugh loudly. Having calmed down, he emptied his glass, loudly placing the empty vessel on the table. The old man said that he had won because his opponent had spilled everything. While Jin Beck was eating his food, the other visitors continued to watch the old people. One of them began to make excuses, saying that it was not his fault. The second one reminded him that there was no need to be so sensitive. He continued that since he won, the loser must bow to him 3 times and henceforth pay him for drinks for the next year. These conditions clearly angered the bald old man. He stood up expansively and turned to the unknown person in the big hat. The drunk old man rudely asked why he was disturbing when people were drinking and added that in restaurants you need to be quiet. The unknown person listened to him carefully. He calmly finished his drink and placed the empty glass on the table. He looked at the old man with a stern look, and he replied that a man who is dressed in a monk's robe and who is arguing over a drink in broad daylight in front of everyone should not show dissatisfaction because of excessive noise. This rude answer offended the bald old man. Grabbing his stick, he began to scream, asking where the unknown person got this dope, and asked if he wanted to die. The unknown man in the hat calmly stood up and asked sarcastically that the monks were already killing. The bald old man was already trembling with rage. Extremely angry, he shouted that he would tear out the stranger's tongue because he dared to tease him and swung his stick. The old man tried to hit the unknown man, but he managed to jump away. The blow hit the table, completely breaking it. All the visitors were shocked by the force of the blow. The famous one began to take out his sword. Calmly looking at the old man, he said that when he pays, he should not forget to pay for the table and for everything that will suffer due to his fault. The drunken old man was amused by the attitude of the unknown and added that he knows how to piss people off. The old man attacked again, asking him to dodge his blow. This time, the unknown person did not jump back, but blocked the blow with his sword. The old man continued to strike. This gave him a lot of pleasure. The unknown man began to get nervous, not expecting such strength and speed from the elderly man. The owner of the restaurant was worried about the safety of his establishment, and the visitors were surprised at the old man. Holding the sticks in his hands, the second old man noted that the young man had a good stance. Then he thought of something. His sticks became covered with blue energy, and at this time the battle was still going on. None of the rivals even thought of retreating. The bald old man noticed that his opponent was already tired and invited him to surrender, but the man refused. Suddenly he saw something. He sharply dodged the chopsticks flying at him, which were endowed with energy. This charge hit right at the base of the second floor of the restaurant. A little more, he rushed through the wooden structure. After everything calmed down, a huge crack appeared on the floor of the second floor, which scared the visitors. The bald old man turned sharply to his comrade and asked displeasedly what he was doing, to which an elderly man with long hair smilingly replied that he was joining the fun and invited his friend to rest. The famous one in the hat, without letting go of the sword from his hands, got nervous. He thought that his opponents were much stronger. He could cope with one, but not two. Then he decided to take a desperate step. He put his hand under the cloak from which 2 bright red lights could be seen. The bald old man was already preparing to continue the fight, but then he heard someone shouting for them all to stop. This someone continued to say that 2 people should not attack one. The young man was surprised to see who was saying this. It was a drunken Jin Beck. He shouted from the second floor that he was the master of Marima and could not leave it just like that. The unknown person in the hat considered him an eccentric. Jin Beck, looking down on the 3 opponents, said that he was the master of Murim and would not leave it just like that. From such an unexpected turn, the opponents stopped fighting for a moment and stared at the drunk guy. Jin Beck, having fun from drinking, leaned his elbows on the handrail of the second floor from which he could not stand it. The guy fell down with a roar. The old people and the young guy continued to look at it. He lay among the rubble and rubbed his head from a bruise. Instantly sobering up, he looked around, not understanding how he fell. One of the old men approached Jin Beck, who did not understand anything, and said that he was a brave kid. An angry, bald old man holding a stick in his hand said that since the guy opened his mouth, it means he is ready to answer for his words. In addition, he asked if he had enough determination, which made Jin Beck nervous. Jin Beck, in a panic, waved his hand and asked to wait. He couldn't remember what he did, but from the look of the old man, he realized that he was an expert. The guy kept thinking about what to do and how to escape. Suddenly, he noticed a table around which there were many empty bottles. He shouted about a drink dispute, which raised questions from the bald old man. Overcoming his fear, he clarified that earlier, the old men had argued over drinks and offered to argue with him this time. One of the old men asked why he suddenly started talking about this and ordered him to get up. Deliver the bag full of gold. Jin Beck set the conditions that if he loses, he will give all this money. And if he wins, they will let that young man go and treat Jin Beck like an older brother. One of the old men, blinded by the gold coins, was already dreaming of getting this money. Releasing the bag from his hands, the guy asked if they had agreed. The old man pointed his finger at the guy and added that if he loses, he will give up his life in return because everything should be of equal value. At this point, the guy became even more nervous and wondered if it was worth it. Why did the old man point his finger at the guy in the hat and added that they wouldn't let him go either? Then he laughed loudly. The bald old man asked with dissatisfaction what kind of nonsense his friend was talking about and why argue about such things. He replied that it was more fun this way. He also added that isn't it obvious that they will win and asked why the bald old man believed in himself. He replied that he believed, after which the bald old man demanded to bring the strongest alcohol available here and the bill for the table he broke. The owner of the restaurant obediently obeyed. Jin Beck, not being confident in himself, asked why don't they drink something like the usual place of strong alcohol. To this, the old man replied that this is absurd because even 4 nights will not be enough for them to end this dispute. One of the old men turned over the hourglass. Time began its countdown. The bald old man announced the terms of the dispute. He said that the winner is the one who drinks more in 2 turns of this clock, and if Jin Beck continues to talk nonsense, he will die in the same place. The guy got nervous and looked at the guy in the hat. He was also nervous and wondered why everything turned out this way. His thoughts were interrupted by an old man who pointed his finger at him and said that it all happened because of him, and therefore he would judge this dispute. The dispute began. The opponents were served 2 large pots of strong alcohol. Having opened one of them, Jin Beck smelled a terrible stench. But still, the guy thought that this was better than fighting with them. He assumed that since they had already gotten pretty drunk before this, he had a chance to win. After thinking, the guy raised the pot. He continued to think that if this was the case, he would definitely not die, but would only lose consciousness. After that, he raised the pot to his mouth and began to drink. The visitors were surprised and said that after just 3 glasses of this drink, they were literally carried away to the next world. After a little time, Jin Beck realized that he was already at the limit of his capabilities. He was already shaking all over, realizing that this was too much, and thought that his throat was about to burn. The old men cheerfully finished the first pot and commented that this is how alcohol should be. Jin Beck was no longer feeling well and realized that things were bad for him. He was already starting to feel dizzy, and everything was already swimming in my eyes. Suddenly, his heart began to beat quickly and strongly, literally jumping out of his chest. The guy with the hat standing behind Jin Beck began to notice something strange. He couldn't believe what he saw. Jin Beck's body began to be enveloped in energy from all sides. One of the old men also drew his attention to this. He was also surprised. He drew the attention of the bald old man to this, saying that the guy draws out all the strength of alcohol due to his internal energy. The bald old man didn't like this. He asked if this was fair, but there was no answer. Jin Beck continued to drink without paying any attention to the old man's words. The old man approached the guy in a rage and asked what he was doing here. He also called him a coward because it was easy to cope with sports using energy. Jin Beck continued drinking without stopping. The old man was angry that the guy ignored him. He sharply grabbed the guy by the shoulder and asked if you shouldn't answer when someone addresses you. But even this, Jin Beck did not react in any way and only continued as if spellbound. Suddenly, the bald old man was afraid of something. Suddenly, bright yellow energy began to flow towards Jin Beck from all directions, raising strong currents of wind. One of the old men asked what happened, to which the bald monk replied that the guy was absorbing his energy. The old man with long gray hair couldn't believe it. Finally, he shouted at the top of his voice that it was the law of absorption and ordered his friend to let Jin Beck go. The bald old man replied that he could not do this. He was also afraid that at this rate the guy would drain all his energy. Worried about his friend, the old man with long hair asked his comrade to admit defeat because there was no other way to escape. The bald old man reluctantly admitted defeat and begged the guy to stop. Immediately after this, Jin Beck opened his eyes, the pupils of which glowed bright yellow. The next moment, an unknown force threw the bald old man aside, giving him a chance to escape. The old man flew across the restaurant and hit his back against the wall. He just lay there and didn't move while the restaurant's visitors were surprised at what they saw. The guy in the hat was also surprised and frightened. He kept thinking that this guy who stood up for him was the same. And at that time, Jin Beck was sitting in the same place, gradually coming to his senses. The guy in the big hat was shocked by what he saw. He looked at the frozen Jin Beck and asked himself who he even was. Finally, Jin Beck came to his senses. An old man with long hair turned to the Jin Beck guy. Out of surprise, he began to look around and ask what happened here. The man, pointing his finger at the guy, began to ask if he was from Soyopa, but Jin Beck did not understand this question. Quite angry, the old man continued and asked not to pretend that the guy understood what he was asking. He also asked about the magic of absorption, which was similar to the law of absorption of Soyopa. But Jin Beck continued to not understand what he was being asked. The guy in the big hat watched his reaction in surprise. Turning to the bald old man, the elderly man asked what they should do with him. He categorically replied that they needed to kill him and that they could do it without anyone noticing. But the old man with long hair rejected this proposal, explaining that if the guy is connected with Soyopa, then their affairs may become more complicated. Moreover, there could be other people of theirs in the area. The bald old man did not like this. Next, they turned to the surprised Jin Beck and admitted that he still won the bet, which means they let that guy go and allowed him to call them big brothers. Jin Beck corrected them by saying that they should call him that. It seemed that they agreed with this, but a moment later, saying that they had to go and saying goodbye, they instantly disappeared from the restaurant, leaving Jin Beck to think about what had happened. He didn't understand anything and wondered why they left in the middle of an argument. Then, looking at his hand, he thought that all this was somehow strange because he had drunk so much. But where did he get so much strength from now? A sudden pain in his head interrupted his thoughts. Jin Beck began to get up from the table to walk and get some fresh air. The guy in the big straw hat continued to silently watch Jin Beck. Evening had already come, but there were still a lot of people on the street. Some were carrying a large load and others were strolling merrily. Coming out of the restaurant, Jin Beck thought where Brother Handong was now and why he didn't say when he would return. An unknown person in a large hat followed him, keeping his distance. Finally, he timidly turned to Jin Beck, but he did not hear. He repeated the appeal while a man with a large load on his shoulders walked nearby. He accidentally hit a large, heavy box. A noise behind him caught Jin Beck's attention, and he turned around. He saw the same guy from the restaurant for whom he stood up. After the collision, he was lying on the ground. Suddenly, a large broken hat, which the guy had not been separated from all this time, fell nearby. It turned out that she was covering her long, dark hair. Jin Beck was already on his way to the victim to help, but was dumbfounded by what he saw. The guy realized that there was a girl in front of him. She was annoyed that the hat had fallen off. Jin Beck also noticed that she was the same age as him. While he was thinking about everything, the girl suddenly stood up and turned to the guy. She clarified to the frightened Jin Beck that during the argument he used martial arts and asked how he did it. But he, I don't remember, said that he didn't know martial arts, to which the girl looked at him with disbelief and asked him not to talk nonsense. Rubbing the back of his head, Jin Beck confidently said that it was true. Grandfather thought that he did not look like a liar. Then she turned in annoyance in the other direction and began to leave. When she finally left, she said that the guy looked like a weakling who had gone where he shouldn't have. Also, she didn't know what kind of strange tricks he used. At this moment, she strongly laughed at her hand, reluctantly speaking the next words. With annoyance, she thanked for the help, and that was all she wanted to say. Jin Beck silently followed her with an incomprehensible look. But the girl was in no hurry to leave. She added that if it weren't for that, she would have managed it herself. After these words, the girl showed a white snake with red eyes that wrapped around her hand. Jin Beck asked what it was. The girl introduced her pet, calling her Hyana, and added that if she bites the guy, he will die. Nervous Jin Beck could not believe that this girl was carrying a poisonous snake in her bosom. The girl sarcastically asked if the guy wanted to be bitten and pointed her snake at him, which had already opened its mouth wide and was ready to bite Jin Beck. This made the guy very scared. Out of fear, he fell to the ground and thought what a strange girl she was. She laughed and said that she was just joking and thanked him again and was about to leave. And then it occurred to Jin Beck. He thought about poison. The guy quickly called out to the girl who was already braiding her hair. Still sitting on the ground, Jin Beck asked the girl that if she knows about poisons, then maybe she knows something about the blackening sleep pill. This question surprised her. She replied that of course she knew and said that they were made from silkworms that turned black after eating poisonous insects. After a deliberate answer, the guy worried, I asked if she knew about the antidote. The girl said that she knew about this too. Jin Beck was taken aback for a moment by these words. He quickly jumped to his feet and grabbed the girl by the shoulders. The guy began to ask her to tell him about it because he needed it at all costs. Such zeal surprised the girl, but she still answered that if the guy had a healing herb, he would be able to prepare an antidote. In addition, she asked why he needed it. Jin Beck replied that he would tell everything later because it was urgent, and asked if it was possible to find this herb right now. The girl replied that it would be difficult to immediately make an antidote. First, it was necessary to collect medicinal herbs in the mountains. Jin Beck was delighted with these words and already wanted to go in search. At first, the girl wanted to object because she had no need to do this. But then she remembered that she owed this guy for saving her. She said that it was too late to go get herbs and suggested meeting in the morning at the top of the mountain. Jin Beck was a little annoyed by this, but still he agreed and promised to come, and they parted ways. Watching Jin Beck leave, the girl kept wondering why he needed an antidote, but she thought it was even better because she needed to find out more about the guy. Evening had come. The first stars were already visible in the sky. The one-story house and the area around it were well groomed. Isaac greeted his guest Handong with open arms and a smile on his face. He said that he was very curious to know how he was doing and invited him to come inside. The silent Handun looked around, anticipating danger. Everything was calm. The gardener was trimming the bushes, and the rest of the staff went about their usual business. But Handong remained on guard, and so two old acquaintances were sitting at the same table. The caring owner treated his guest to tea. The conversation still could not begin. The owner of the house nervously fingered the cup in his hand. Finally, he started the conversation by saying that he had heard news about the elder Kanduna, whom Isaac considered a smart person, but who ended his life so stupidly. He asked the gloomy Kandun what he would do next and offered to talk to the mayor so that he would appoint him head of the security. After these words, Kandun sharply reined in Isaac. Rising from the table, Handun sharply asked what he was doing here, because right now their comrades from Surazo were dying at the hands of Jucho's puppets, while Isaac sat on the tail of an aristocrat and lived happily ever after. With anger in his eyes, Handong asked if the owner of the house was ashamed of this. These words did not impress Isaac at all. He calmly replied that the world had changed, and His Majesty, whom they accompanied, had also left this world. These words hurt Handong. Turning to an old acquaintance, Isaac added that it was time to face the truth. This friend's position visibly unnerved Handong. Isaac told Kandun, who was looking down on him, that it was time to face the truth. He continued by saying that the world has changed and they should do not only what they should, but what they can. Having calmed down a little, Handong asked what Isaac's choice was to be a puppy of the aristocrats. To this, the owner of the house only calmly took his hand to a cup of tea. Isaac, looking mysteriously into the distance, replied that everything was not so simple. Handong turned his head to see where his comrade was looking. In the distance, two young girls were picking flowers. One of them was a maid, and the second, judging by her outfit, was a mistress. Feeling the men's gaze on her, she smiled and waved her hand cheerfully, welcoming the owner of the house and his guest. Isaac, in response, also waved his hand and smiled. Kandun was about to put forward his hypothesis, but his interlocutor interrupted him, knowing what the question would be about, and confirmed his friend's guess, after which Isaac plunged into memories. He said that on behalf of Surazo, he had arrived to monitor Anmundsen, and he had entered here just like one of his soldiers. He continued Oinvjdi during the detour. Isaac saw a palanquin being chased by a group of robbers. He single-handedly dealt with the bandits. The next moment, he discovered who was riding in this palanquin. This was a dark-haired girl who was the daughter of the mayor. In gratitude for saving his daughter, the mayor promoted him to the rank of Isaac. This was to his advantage, since he could monitor the boss even more carefully. But he soon realized that Mr. Yuppie is a good man who takes pity on his subjects and treats everyone equally. And he showed great concern for Isaac himself, instead of alienating him because of his feelings for his daughter. More and more talk about the wedding began. Isaac put the empty cup on the table and summed up what he thought. He also calmly added that even if Jucho has real power, he will later become the mayor of this place and be able to resist him. Isaac ended his monologue by saying that he was thinking about the future. These arguments calmed Kadun a little. He continued to listen carefully. Isaac advised his friend to look at things soberly because he would not be able to resist Yucho with those few who remained loyal to Surazo. The last words seriously angered Handong. She said that Isaac was talking nonsense and that he should look at things soberly. Looking angrily at his friend, he said that while he becomes an outstanding mayor, His Highness the Crown Prince may die, and with him their comrades. The next moment, Han Dong threw a cup of tea which flew past Isaac and crashed against the wall. The owner of the house did not react to this and continued to be calm. Having calmed down a little, but still with anger in his eyes, Handun added that if Isaac thinks that everything will go according to his plan, then he is a fool. For some time, the two comrades looked at each other in silence. Finally, Isaac broke the silence and asked his friend to calm down. He asked if he was curious to know what his elder was going to do in this city. This question calmed and interested Handong. Handun asked if Isaac had received any message from the elder. He replied that he had not, because Handun could guess it himself. Isaac asked if his friend Tak Wangan knew who was Jucho's right hand and was very similar to him. And he added that he is right now preparing to enter Anmunsen's territory. This information surprised Handong. Isaac said that this was being done to convince Mayor Anmundsen to swear allegiance to Jucho. After hearing this, Handong thought for a minute. He turned around sharply and said that he had found the answer he was looking for, and that's why he was leaving. Isaac asked him to stop. Handun stopped to listen to his friend. He said that if he touched Wangan, Anmundsen would obviously be attacked. Therefore, as Anmundsen's soldier, he will not sit idly by. Handun turned to his friend and calmly replied that he should do what he must, and he will do as he decides. Isaac didn't know what to answer to this, and silently looked at his friend. Night fell. On the outer border of Anmundsen, there were large tents and many carts. The servant informed his master that food had already been served. Toei Kingdom Han Taik Wangan, sitting at the table, was dissatisfied with the quality of the dishes and anticipated that when they entered Anmunsong, exquisite dishes would be waiting for him there. The prime minister in charge of military affairs responded that then they needed to quickly enter the city because after a 3-day stop, the soldiers showed their dissatisfaction. Wangan replied that he wanted this too, but because Mrs. Nungyeon suddenly disappeared, they had no choice but to wait. Suddenly, someone came into the tent, which scared both the prime minister and Wangan. This someone added that the lady had done nothing but practice martial arts all her life without even learning to read and write. It was the same Mrs. Nenyon. When they asked her where she had been all this time, she rudely replied that she was looking around. Approaching Wangan, she said that her ears had been itching all this time and asked if they had scolded her again behind her back. Wangan replied that they could not afford such a thing. He further respectfully said that although this journey had been approved by the lady's father, she should have been a little more flexible for the sake of her figure, to which she displeasedly asked if he thought that this pitiful figure could save a life. To this, Wangan, a little fermenting with fear, replied that if he could combine a good body and martial arts, the lady would make an excellent daughter of the emperor. At that same second, Mrs. Ninyong closed Wangan's mouth and told him to watch his words, because such speech could be equated to rebellion. She also added that since Wangan believes that the figure is so important, why doesn't he take up sports himself? These words belittled him. Having freed himself from the hands of the madam, he turned to the prime minister and said that since the madam had returned, tomorrow morning they would go to Anmundsen. He also ordered a message to be conveyed to the mayor. The prime minister immediately obeyed the order. While everyone began to run around in confusion, the lady thought about tomorrow morning. She remembered Jin Beck, whom she promised to help with the search for medicinal herbs. This memory made her smile, which one of the maids noticed. She immediately asked if something good had happened because Nenyon had not smiled for a long time. Blushing with embarrassment, she rudely asked what the maid was talking about. A message from Tui Tek Wangan reached the mayor in the middle of the night. Yupyo read this letter carefully and without emotion. Having finished reading the letter, he turned to his subordinate and said that the guests had finally decided to enter the city and everything had already been prepared for this. With a good-natured smile on his face, the mayor ordered his subordinate to convey this news to everyone and prepare the way to the castle, after which Yupe looked out the window at the night sky and thought about something. Handong stood on the roof of one of the buildings and listened to the silence of the night. Suddenly he turned around sharply and prepared to run. He quickly jumped on the roofs and thought that he finally understood what the elder wanted. Handong believed that the elder wanted to team up with him to kill Tagwangan, and thus Sarazo would try to say that he was not going to sit back and ignore what was happening. While he was thinking about this, he imagined the death of his enemy. Handong looked forward resolutely and thought that he must cope with this mission. At this time, Wangan was already lining up his warriors, and Handong thought that he should definitely take advantage of this chance. The smiling Mr. Yupyo walked with Isaac and looked forward to tomorrow, and Handong continued to think that he should make it clear to all the subjects of the Han Kingdom that they had not yet been subjugated. Handong was determined to continue running towards his goal. And at this time, lonely Jin Beck kept wondering where brother Handun had gone. Despite the fact that it was already night, the mayor continued to work. Preparations for an important event for the city were in full swing. Someone was busy with the festive table, and someone decorates the castle. Yupio summed up that they were almost finished with the preparations. Isaac, who was next to his master, agreed with this. Suddenly, the experienced warrior felt someone's eyes on him. A small silhouette could be seen on the roof. Isaac was about to turn around and look at the roof, but the silhouette quickly disappeared. Isaac thought about something but remained silent. He realized who was on the roof. Morning came. Wangan entered the city as planned. He was accompanied by many servants and musicians. The townspeople cheerfully greeted the high-ranking official. She actively discussed this event because not each of them had previously seen such important guests in their city. Wangan, sitting comfortably on the stretcher and looking down at the warm welcome, was surprised that Anmundsen had blossomed so much. Suddenly, the embattled prime minister turned to the official. Wangan asked without initiative what he needed. The minister tried to find the words. Finally, he replied that Mrs. Nenyon disappeared again as soon as they entered the city gates. This news shocked Wangan. He screamed because he couldn't believe it happened again. It's good that he couldn't be heard because of the city noise. At this time, Jin Beck was wandering in the forest, looking for that same mountain. His rumbling stomach indicated that he wanted to eat. Finally, he saw in front of him the girl with whom he had agreed to meet, and was glad that he was still able to find her here. She noticed his arrival and turned to him. Today she looked different. Her hair was no longer hidden by a large hat. Jin Beck was taken aback by surprise. He wondered if this was the same person with whom he had agreed to meet. The girl got tired of his piercing gaze and asked why he was staring. Jin Beck made the excuse that he didn't recognize her at first, but thought that she was beautiful. So that the guy wouldn't think of anything unnecessary, the girl immediately explained that she had other plans for today, which is why she was dressed like that. But Jin Beck continued to look at her without taking his eyes off. Just urging the girl to quickly find grass and return brought the guy to his senses. It was clear that the girl liked the delight in Jin Beck's eyes. This made her a little embarrassed. Finally, Wangan arrived at a spacious castle where he and the mayor Yupyo, in the presence of servants and guards, exchanged greetings. Yupa bowed respectfully and expressed his hopes that the road did not tire his dear guest. Wangan again noted that the city of Anmunseong had prospered greatly, thanks to the spread of trade, to which the mayor replied that it was all thanks to the hard work of his subjects. Wangan responded to this by saying that the reason why his subjects were able to work in safety was because the Han kingdom had prevented all dangers in the district. The mayor did not dare to contradict this. Yupa agreed with what was said and with a smile invited his dear guest to move on. Suddenly, the official's understanding attracted something. A young girl stood among the servants nearby. Wangan asked the mayor her name. This question was unexpected for him, but he replied that her name was Nayun. The official approached the servant girl and said that she would leave this place with him. This discouraged both the girl and her master. Wangan also added that from now on she will have to serve him. This alerted Yupyo and Isaac. The mayor tried to explain that this girl had her own family in the city, but the guest did not listen to him and said that all Anmundsen's things would become things of the Khan kingdom, and this could not be changed. Also, with an arrogant look, Wangan added that in these circumstances his orders had the same force as the orders of His Majesty the Crown Prince. Yupyo could not cope with this argument. The smile disappeared from his face. He agreed with the official's words despite the maid's pleas. From this, Wangan laughed and said that this is why Yupyo is the mayor and that he likes such wisdom. Next, the guest, placing his hand on Yupyo's shoulder, suggested talking about the affairs of the kingdom of Honorable Isaac watched all this. It was clear that he did not like the behavior of the high-ranking official, and this angered him. Seeing a lot of herbs and other plants, Jin Beck asked the girl what kind of grass he should dig up. She had already found the right herb and showed it to Jin Beck, saying that it would be the basis for the medicine. The guy began to look at her carefully and think about something. Finally, he asked whether the medicine would be effective for a person who was struck by poison, but not by the denigrating dream pill itself. The girl, after thinking a little, answered that if the poison belongs to the same person, then the medicine can help, and asked why the guy was asking about this. What he heard made Jin Beck very happy. He jumped up and said that then he should return to Namha. The guy's unpredictability again confused the girl, but she still asked if the guy lived in Namha. Jin Beck replied that he should give medicine there and Medan. Hearing the woman's name, the girl was dumbfounded. Jin Beck began to remember that Medan was beautiful and kind, but he could not protect her. While he was saying this, the girl looked at him in surprise. The guy also added that he could also pick a flower for her at the same time. The girl thought that he was talking about his girlfriend. Jin Beck again asked about medicinal plants and took the herb from the girl's hands as an example. She was still upset with her conclusion. The girl rudely answered Jin Beck to do what he wanted and turned away. The guy was a little surprised. The girl also added that she would only get in the way, so he should look for it himself. Looking at the grass as a sample, Jin Beck wondered why the girl suddenly became so cold. Having found a similar medicinal plant, the guy thought it was better to dig it up, but the feeling of hunger still did not leave him. He no longer had any strength. Having pulled out a bunch of grass and holding it in his hand, Jin Beck began to think about something. At this time, the dissatisfied girl could not believe that Jin Beck already had someone and regretted that she had agreed to help him. Suddenly, she looked somewhere with interest. She saw Jin Beck, who had already opened his mouth to sit down on a bunch of grass. The girl, trying to stop him, screamed that it was trillium grass. The girl shouted again that Jin Beck was a fool and that there was no need to eat everything because it was not medicine. But it was too late. The guy was already sitting with his cheeks stuffed with this grass. The girl, realizing that she didn't have time, fell into a stupor. I was pretty worried, and opening her mouth, she thought that this idiot ate grass that causes pain throughout the body, comparable to an insect bite. Jin Beck noticed the girl's excitement and asked what he did wrong. The guy continued to eat the grass until he felt something. He began to shiver and grabbed his stomach. The girl, seeing this, thought that the reaction had already begun. Suddenly, Jin Beck started coughing violently and asking what it was. But after some time, he cleared his throat and calmly said that it's not without reason that all good medicine is such a roller coaster. The girl was surprised that everything was fine with the guy. The girl thought that maybe she was mistaken and the guy found the right herb. But no, the grass that Jin Beck ate had exactly the same color as the trillium. A moment later, she remembered yesterday's incident in the restaurant, which was also very strange. The girl looked at Jin Beck, who was sitting next to him, and continued to collect medicinal herbs, and wondered if he was pretending to be a fool while actually possessing martial arts. She decided with a determined look that she had to check it out and pulled out her white snake into her sleeve. The girl, looking at Jin Beck and holding the snake behind her back, thought that she had to be convinced of her guess. She was afraid because the fangs of the snake were filled with fiery poison, but the girl had an antidote. She brought Hyane closer to her and ordered her to bite Jin Beck. The snake seemed to understand every word of the mistress. She quickly crawled towards her goal, avoiding obstacles and making hissing sounds. At this time, Jin Beck, without suspecting anything, calmly collected medicinal herbs. Finally, the snake, opening its mouth wide and releasing its sharp fangs, attacked its target. She grabbed the bare part of Jin Beck's leg, causing him to scream. The guy looked around sharply, not understanding who bit him. He didn't notice the snake because it had already managed to hide in the grass. Hyana quickly returned to her mistress without attracting attention. After that, the girl asked Jin Beck what happened to him, to which the guy replied that someone had bitten him. He continued to look around. As if knowing nothing, she asked if an insect had bitten him and at the same time carefully watched Jin Beck. He replied that the pain was too acute for an insect, and now he could not concentrate on searching for herbs. The girl continued to watch. Without waiting for the desired effect, she was already starting to get nervous. The girl timidly asked if Jin Beck was okay. He was slightly surprised that she was so worried. The guy with a smile on his face replied that he was completely fine, only the bite site tingled a little. The girl was shocked by what she heard. She did not expect such an answer, and the fact that the poison had no effect on him. Looking at the guy who was calmly collecting herbs, she thought about how this could be because he had just been bitten by Hyana. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden movements of Jin Beck, who had already picked a full basket of herbs and asked if this would be enough. The girl timidly replied that this would be enough. Jin Beck noticed that the girl was somewhat nervous and asked if everything was okay. She tried to pretend to be happy, but at that time she assumed that this guy was a master and that she should be careful. Trying to leave as quickly as possible, the girl said that she forgot something and that she would be back now. Jin Beck became interested in what she forgot. To this, the girl timidly replied that she forgot the tools that were needed to create an antidote. Jin Beck said that he understood her and wished that she would return soon. The nervous girl took something out of her sleeve. She thought that they would see each other later. At that same second, there was an explosion and everything around was enveloped in white smoke. From surprise, Perel was a little scared. Surprised, Jin Beck thought that her farewell sounded as if she had simply decided to leave him. Rubbing his eyes, the guy also thought about why the girl used this smoke projectile and assumed that everyone was leaving Murim like that. Jin Beck began to yawn, covering himself with his hand. Holding his head, he thought that for some reason he was suddenly drawn to sleep, although he had woken up not long ago. His eyelids became heavy and his eyes slowly closed. Jin Beck cheerfully fell on the soft grass and thought he could sleep a little. And if the girl returns, you will wake him up. It was a pleasant, quiet day. A light breeze swayed the tree branches. Suddenly, a bright light began to emanate from the guy's chest in all directions. It seemed that all the energy of the surrounding nature was striving towards the sleeping Jin Beck. At this time, several people were walking through the lifeless desert. One of them was tied up. Sitting on a horse, Shinny turned to her subordinates and said that they should hurry up. A little more and they would see the fortress. After that, she silently looked back. Jin Beck's grandfather walked silently behind, tied up. Shinny turned to the old man and reminded her that his grandson had shot her that time. She remembered that moment. The gun could not fire with such force, so Shinny assumed that the bullet was charged with energy. She asked the old man how his grandson was able to fill the bullet with so much energy. Grandfather took a couple more steps and suddenly stopped. He silently looked at the sky and thought about something. He saw something and realized everything. The old man, with sadness in his eyes, realized that in the end, the seal that was on his grandson had been removed. Jin Beck was still sleeping on the grass and the energy was raging around him. At some point, a translucent ball began to form on his chest. All the energy rushed towards it, raising a strong wind. The outlines of a small room began to be visible, which was completely flooded with light. The next moment, the picture became clear. You could see the room in detail. A small, curly-haired boy lay completely covered with a blanket and suffering from a fever. Unable to overcome the pain, he called his grandfather. The exhausted child said that he was in a lot of pain. A drooping old man sitting next to him could not help his grandson. He was just silently thinking about something, trying to decide on something. Finally, he took the glowing ball in his hand and said that he did not want to resort to this. The little boy was getting worse. He could hardly open his eyes. Placing the child on his lap, the old man began to concentrate energy over the exhausted boy. The grandfather said that he could not lose his grandson and asked Jin Beck for forgiveness. The light at this time was becoming stronger. While performing the ritual, the old man expressed the hope that this power would sleep in the child until he could use it as it should. The light intensified and almost completely blinded the grandfather's face. In his sleep, sweating with excitement, Jin Beck called his grandfather. The next moment, the guy woke up abruptly with tears in his eyes, continuing to call his grandfather. It took Jin Beck some time to come to his senses and calm down. Finally, he realized that it was just a dream, and he just fell asleep on the grass. Meanwhile, evening had already come. The lanterns had already been lit in the castle, but the celebration and honoring of the city guests continued. Wangan, sitting at a table that was bursting with abundance, laughed loudly and had fun. A high-ranking official turned to the mayor and said that there were rumors that he was very thrifty. But looking at all these delicacies, one could bet that this was not entirely true. Yupyo replied that Wangan was a valuable guest for him and therefore everything possible was done for his arrival. All the guests were having fun and drinking, except Isaac, who was not very pleased to be here. He just watched the others. Continuing the conversation with a smile, the mayor said that today's evening is absolutely nothing compared to what will happen tomorrow at the banquet for which all the aristocracy of the surrounding area will gather. Wangan asked if Yupyo knew that he had a speech for tomorrow. The mayor replied that of course he knew it. The guest continued and said that in this case, the head of the city should quickly make his decision. Yupyo, without suspecting anything, asked what decision he should make. The next moment, Wangan angrily hit the table with his cup. An ominous atmosphere hung over the festive table. Yupyo and his high-ranking guest silently looked at each other. Vanga, without hiding his pleasure, told the mayor not to pretend that he did not understand. The official clarified that he was talking about the oath of allegiance to Mr. Chancellor Jucho. These words did not bother Yupyo at all. Outwardly, he remained the same calm and cordial person. Wangan, looking angrily at the mayor, told him not to pretend that he did not understand what decision he should make. The official clarified that he was talking about the oath of allegiance to Mr. Chancellor Jucho. Yupa continued to sit quietly, expressing respect to the guest, but he still felt the ominous aura of what was happening. For some time, the owner and his guest sat in silence, looking at each other. It seemed that something bad was about to happen. Finally, Wangan asked the mayor why he was silent and assumed that he was shy, but Yupyo continued to remain silent and look at the guests. The rest of the guests were also nervous. Wangan began to justify the need to make a decision because His Majesty is too young to manage affairs in the state, and if some kind of external aggression suddenly arose while the country is in such a difficult situation, then trouble could happen. Splashing with saliva and nervous, the official said that at such a time, all mayors should unite because everything cannot be ruined due to some personal reasons, and asked if he was right. Isaac at this time emptied his glass. He calmly placed it on the table, preparing to speak his mind. He began to say that if his subjects take an oath of allegiance to someone other than His Majesty, this attracted Wangan's attention. Next, Isaac calmly asked whether this would be an uprising. After this, the atmosphere at the festive table became tense. Wangan was taken aback and frowned. The mayor and other officials opened their mouths from the surprise and danger of the words they heard. Wangan jumped up from the table in a rage and demanded to repeat what he had said. The mayor tried to calm him down. He continued to be indignant, saying that what Isaac said was complete nonsense. Turning to Isaac, Yupa asked him to quickly apologize. Isaac did not like this order, but he remained silent. Rising from the table and humbly lowering his head, he apologized to Wangan, who called him a stupid boy. And he threatened that he would not get away with a simple punishment for such an insult to the prime minister. The guards were on standby, and Yupyo continued to justify his subordinate, saying that he still does not fully understand the state of affairs in the country. The offended Wangan said that he had lost his appetite and was leaving despite the mayor's request to forget everything and continue the holiday. Upon leaving, the high-ranking official ordered all his subordinates to return to their chambers. Excited Yupyo did not give up hope of settling everything. Other guests, saddened by the incident, also expressed a desire to leave. They were unhappy that Isaac said such words in front of Mr. Tevi Wangan. All the guests left. The disgruntled mayor stood silently at the table and pondered what had happened. Isaac approached him and bowed his head and asked for forgiveness from his master, blaming himself for everything. A little upset, Yupyo turned to his commander and, in order to encourage him, said that this was also his fault. Finally, the mayor said that everything was in order and he could go about his business. These words did not reassure Isaac. He was still upset because he had let his master down. The silence of the night was broken by someone's quick steps. Tevi Wangan and his numerous guards walked through the city at night. They were accompanied by a man with a lantern, but none of them noticed that they were being watched. Handun, hiding on the roof, followed on the heels of his target. Wangan continues to be indignant at what happened at the banquet, saying that he won't leave it just like that, and threatening that those responsible will pay for the humiliation of Mr. Yucho. Having reached the chambers of a high-ranking official, the head of security ordered his subordinates to take all precautions in the area around the chambers. The warriors immediately obeyed. It was deep night. 2 guards stood quietly at the entrance to the chambers, guarding their master's sleep. But no one noticed that Handun was already waiting on the roof. He quietly sank to the ground so as not to attract too much attention. Looking at the second floor of a large building, Handong concluded that his goal was here. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a sword appeared that almost touched the warrior's neck. This sword belonged to Isaac, who stood behind Khandun, who was amazed that he had not discovered it earlier. Isaac threateningly ordered to follow him first because if Khanduna is noticed, a lot of noise will arise. Handong agreed with this statement. Finding themselves far beyond Wangan's chambers, the 2 warriors stood opposite each other. Only the moon illuminated a small area. Holding the sword in his hands, Isaac said that as a soldier of Anmundsen, he could not ignore Handun's actions. His opponent immediately summed up that further conversation made no sense. Handun took the hilt of his sword and told Isaac to do his job. He quickly released his sword and attacked his opponent, saying that he would be dedicated to his cause. 2 experienced warriors clashed in an equal fight. Handun confidently blocked Isaac's attacks, although at some point it was difficult for him to do so. Isaac continued to actively attack his opponent and did not express any emotions at all. After a long fight, 2 balls hit each other with a roar and sparks. Each of the opponents tried to break the enemy's defense, but for some time they were on equal terms. Finally, Handun managed to find a gap in Isaac's defense, which he immediately took advantage of. Handong decisively swung his sword to deliver the final blow and end the fight. Isaac became noticeably nervous and tried to do something, but he managed to defend himself. The 2 swords struck each other again. The blows were so strong that at some point the opponents were literally thrown away from each other in different directions, but they were able to stand on their feet and were ready to continue the fight. Khandun and Isaac looked at each other, realizing that they were equal in strength, after which Isaac said that this fight would lead to nothing if they did not use all their strength. After that, he brought his hand to the ball and began to concentrate green energy in it. Handun repeated the same thing with his weapon, which began to glow blue, and added that he was sorry. After all, they were comrades. Suddenly there was a rumble, and small stones began to fall from the rock. Khandun was surprised by this, because he thought that his opponent was involved in this. But this was not so. While the comrades were preparing to attack each other, a passage opened in the rock, which caused loud sounds. Khandun and Isaac looked at this puzzled, and did not understand what was happening and whose hands it was. When the passage into the rock was almost open, the opponents disappeared from the recent place of the duel so as not to attract attention. Isaac hid on the roof of the building and was surprised by what was happening, because he did not know that there was a cave behind the mansion. Finally, someone came out of the cave and someone's leg appeared in the light of the moon. Isaac was taken aback by what he saw, because he recognized this man. It was the mayor who, together with his maid, came out of a cave hidden in the rock. The woman was holding a small box in her hands. The mayor and his maid came out of a cave hidden in the rock. The woman was holding a small box in her hands. The moonlight illuminated Yupio's face. He was serious and gloomy. This did not look like the usually smiling mayor. Alarmed, Isaac, continuing to observe everything, wondered why his master was here. Yupio, not suspecting that he was being watched, approached a small statue of a mythical beast. Behind this statue, there was an inconspicuous button that the mayor pressed. This action triggered a mechanism that closed the entrance to the Yupio cave, and the maid hurried to leave here. What he saw angered Isaac. This was indicated by his frowning eyebrows and anxious gaze. The girl contacted the mayor and asked whether Tevi Wangan would be happy with this, and what would happen if he asked for more. To this, Yupio replied that this would convince the official because even with this, he would be able to build several huge houses. The maid, opening the box and taking out a beautiful necklace from it, was surprised because she thought that it would go to Sojong's dowry. Yupa asked again without first understanding who the girl was talking about. The next moment, the mayor's face changed. It expressed anger and contempt. Yupio sternly asked who allowed the maid to decide this issue at her own discretion. The girl was scared to see her master with such a face. Isaac was shocked by what he saw. He had never seen the mayor so angry. For a moment, he doubted that this was his master. Yupa continued to scold the frightened girl. He recalled that he had already told her several times that she should know her place. Finally, he asked if the girl wanted the same thing done to her daughter as with her previous husband. After these words, the maid became even more frightened and obediently remained silent. Handun, who also heard and saw everything, looked at the shocked Isak. He understood his feelings without words, so he simply remained silent. Yupio turned around and ordered the girl not to mark time because the mayor had to give this box to Takwangan before he went to bed. The sad woman, with lowered eyes, agreed with her master and hurried after him. They left silently while Isaac, sitting on the roof, watched them go. Finally, the men were able to straighten up without fear of being noticed. Isaac was thinking about something, and Handun silently looked at him, trying to understand his friend's next actions. Finally, the dissatisfied Handong remembered that Isaac said that he had been watching Yupio all this time. In his opinion, everything was very obvious. From these words and the understanding of his miscalculation, Isaac became angry and frowned. The next moment, he rushed towards the cave while Handun tried to understand why Isak was doing this. Someone lit the torch, which was the only source of light. Isaac, with a torch in his hand, decided to go into that very cave. Handun at first wanted to stay at the entrance, but still followed his comrade. After a while, they discovered countless riches that the mayor was hiding here. Gold shone brightly in the light of the torch. But besides the gold, there were also people in the cave. They were sitting in wooden cages. It seemed that they were crazy because they didn't say anything, they just mooed. This picture surprised Isaac. He kept thinking how this could be and why these people are here. At this time, the light was still burning in Wangan's chambers. He was not sleeping. Examining the gift of precious jewelry, the joyful official highly praised its beauty and Mr. Yupa. Wangan sincerely thanked the mayor who was sitting next to him. To this, Yupio said that it was an honor for him to bring him joy, but the high-ranking guest's delight quickly ceased. This made Yupio happy. Putting the decoration back into the box, Wangan slyly asked if the mayor understood that this was not enough. Yupa was already anticipating new demands from his guest. He offered Wangan even more jewelry, but he was not interested in that. He had something more important in mind. Approaching the mayor, he ominously said that the emu needed proof of loyalty to Mr. Jucho. Wangan continued and said that according to ancient history, there was once a man named Bayon who risked cutting off his legs to prove that the jade he gave to the king was genuine. Wangan did not demand that Yupio do the same, but asked if he should not destroy everyone who interferes with Mr. Jucho. The mayor silently thought about something. Finally, he decided to express his guess to Wangan. The official, without listening to the interlocutor to the end, answered in the affirmative that Yupa immediately understood everything correctly. He continued that, for the sake of the common good and peace, and to prove his loyalty to Yupio, it was necessary to cut off Isaac's hands. Meanwhile, it began to rain. In the large house, only one window had a light on. This light came from a small lamp, which was the only source of light in the room. Isaac sat all alone and, holding a cup of tea in his hands, thought sadly about something. Suddenly, a young girl approached him, and surprised that the man was still awake, asked what was bothering him. Continuing to stubbornly think about something, Isaac replied that it was difficult for him to say what was bothering him. To this, the girl sat down next to him and said that she was the one who would become his wife, and spouses should not have secrets from each other. Isaac listened to the girl in silence. Now he thought about the girl's words. Finally deciding not to have a difficult conversation, Isaac put the cup on the table. Under the girl's attentive gaze, he began to say that the mayor loved him like his own son, and that he was very grateful to him for this. With contempt, Isaac continued by saying that despite this, today he saw another side of Yupio that he did not know about before and which he could not even imagine, so he was very disappointed in him. The girl was surprised and excited by this revelation from her lover. Rising to her feet, she said that her father was a good man and always thought about the country and was merciful to everyone. Approaching the window and looking at the bad weather, the girl said that this was just a shell and that for everyone he was her father. Turning towards Isaac, she continued and confidently said that in fact he was the enemy of her own father. The words of his future wife puzzled and amazed Isaac. Jumping up from his seat in surprise, the man asked why Yupio was the enemy of the girl's own father. She replied that he killed him in order to take away the power of her family. Isaac did not expect to hear these words and did not know how to respond to them, so he remained silent. Taking a timid step, the girl turned to Isaac again and said that she still could not forget what happened then. Assuming that the man thought about Yupio the same way as she did, the girl offered to stop the mayor together. This proposal surprised Isaac. Just about to cry, the girl summed up that she could no longer pretend that she did not see Yupio's atrocities. Morning came. The streets were again filled with a large number of people hurrying about their business. Jin Beck was also here, who was annoyed that the girl didn't come in the end. Besides, brother Handong didn't show up either. I'm trying to squeeze through the crowd. He was wondering why there are so many people on the street today. Suddenly, he overheard a conversation between two men. One of them asked if the banquet was opening for Mr. Tevi today. The second confirmed the interlocutor's guess and added that all the influential people of Anmundsson would gather together. Having heard about the banquet, Jin Beck suggested that his brother might be there. But he was more inspired by the fact that, as one of the men said, there would be many delicacies at the banquet. Dreams of delicious food were interrupted by an unexpected order to make way. Jin Beck turned around to look at the one who gave the order. Suddenly, he saw several services carrying large red parcels along the street. Just their appearance impressed the guy. Looking at this with his mouth open, he kept wondering who was being transported in this cart. The answer didn't take long to arrive. A familiar girl's face could be seen through the window. Nin Yong, who was bored on this trip, suddenly heard someone from the crowd calling her. It was Jin Beck. He waved his hand briskly and asked to look here. The girl was surprised to see him here. She remembered that this was the guy she saw yesterday. Embarrassed, the girl chose to pretend that she didn't know him. Jin Beck tried to get closer to the cart but tripped and fell. The lady's guard was already heading towards him. When Nenyon saw the fall, she was afraid for the guy. While Jin Beck was trying to get up, the girl, seeing how he was fussing, thought that yesterday she was wrong. A moment later, the lady's guard approached the guy and rudely asked where he was going. Nenyon was reassured by a subordinate and said that she knew this guy. The guard bowed to the lady and Jin Beck asked for some reason that she left yesterday, although he was waiting for her. The girl asked for forgiveness for this and justified herself by saying that she had urgent matters and did not have time to return because she had to prepare for the banquet. Jin Beck asked if the girl was talking about the banquet that would be held today, and in addition asked if she was from the aristocracy. Nenyon replied that of course she was from the aristocracy because even yesterday she was dressed accordingly. Jin Beck remembered the girl's outfit yesterday and agreed with it. The next moment a great idea came to his head, which made the guy open his eyes wide. Jin Beck asked if he could go to the banquet with Nenyon. The girl was not happy with this idea, to which the guy said that she left him yesterday and had to pay off her debt. These arguments also did not affect the girl. Then Jin Beck started making puppy dog eyes to persuade Nenyon. She became even more embarrassed. After this, the girl thought that yesterday she was embarrassed and then ran away completely, and now she felt sorry for the guy who was waiting for her. Finally, she agreed to take Jin Beck to the banquet but asked him to be quiet. The guy was happy to hear this and thanked the girl. She also added that he must comply with etiquette, so Jin Beck had to change into the clothes she would give him. This puzzled the guy. The celebration was truly grandiose. The large hall was covered with red carpets with ornaments. Music played and dancers in beautiful outfits performed their choreographic numbers. The guests had fun and did not miss the opportunity to be nice to the mayor of Yupe. Decorated tables were laden with delicious dishes for every taste, from fish to meat. The dressed-up Jin Beck was shocked by the delights that were typical for a village guy, while Nenyon, standing on the sidelines, blushed at the guy's behavior. Jin Beck had already begun to look at the delicacies, but the girl said that they would eat after listening to the speeches and, turning around, ordered the guy to follow her. Looking at the guy, Nenyon thought that she was wrong after all. In the end, Jin Beck was just a hillbilly who did not understand how this world works. She continued to look at him confusedly. Seeing the guy's sincere joy, she thought that now he looks completely different. Really liked it here. Suddenly, Jin Beck had another question. What kind of girl is this? With a smile on his face, he finally asked what her name was. The embarrassed girl did not expect this. The guy gets lost in the back of his head. I'm embarrassed. He said that he never asked her name before, although they already knew each other, and this is something you need to know. The girl, after thinking a little, realized that she did not need to reveal her real name, Chu Nenyon. She introduced herself as Chu Nung-sung, to which the guy replied that his name was Jin Beck, and added that although it was a little late, he was pleased to meet you. Several warriors kept order at the banquet, among whom one man clearly stood out. It was Han Dong. He stood silently at his post, pretending to be Wang Gen's guard, and waited for the right moment. When the guests took their places, Mayor Yupa came out to them, accompanied by Isaac. Addressing the guests, Yupyo said that they all tried their best to get here, and the current banquet was a special celebration prepared for the dear guests of Anmunsen. The mayor did not rant for long and greeted Mr. Tek Wangan with a sincere smile. Toei of the Khan Kingdom, smiling disgustingly, walked not alone, but accompanied by two unknown men whose faces were revealed without emotional red masks. Jin Beck turned to Nong Sung and asked who these people in red masks were. She replied that they were guard warriors who protect Taevi. Standing in front of the guests, Wangan said that he was pleased to see everyone and explained the reason why he was standing in front of them. This reason was to clarify the situation in the country. He reminded those present that His Majesty, who inherited the throne from the previous king, could not attend to the affairs of the country due to health problems. Therefore, the throne was empty, and therefore the state was threatened by crisis and other difficulties. Smiling slyly, Wangan suggested that in this case, by transferring power to the wise Mr. Prime Minister Yucho, it would be possible to promote peace and harmony. He continued by saying that he would like the guests, together with Mr. Mayor, to express their devotion to Mr. Chancellor Jucho. These words surprised the guests, who began to look at each other. Mayor Yupyo stood silently near Wangan and did not express any emotions. The Tevi of the Khan Kingdom smiled again insidiously, knowing what would happen next. He said that before taking an oath, it was necessary to eradicate all those who do not recognize this truth and could cause a rebellion. The guests did not understand what Wangan was talking about and began to panic when they heard the word riot. But Handan understood everything and was ready to act. All that was left was to wait for the right moment. In all honesty, Wangan, feigning annoyance, said that he would never even think about such a thing. But as they said, even behind the light there was a shadow. He continued by saying that he did not think that in such a close place the seeds of rebellion could sprout. Wangan loudly addressed Commander Isaac, who, even after hearing what he heard, remained calm. Expressing contempt, the official continued to say that if you look at a small spark and leave it alone, it will grow into an uncontrollable fire. Wangan raised his hand and shouted that they must nip this in the bud from the very beginning. At that very second, nets were thrown at Isaac from behind. The commander did not expect such a turn of events. An annoyed Han Dong, watching from the frightened crowd, could only watch his friend's arrest. Isaac was completely stuck in the treacherous fetters that bound him. Isaac, like the rest of the guests, did not expect that a net would be thrown at him. He honestly tried to free himself. Jin Beck and Nenyon, watching all this, sincerely did not understand what was happening. Isaac was angry that he was caught in the net. He tried in every possible way to get out, but his attempts were even. Even his sharp sword could not cut these bonds, which surprised and angered Isaac even more. On top of that, the order was given to tie up the commander. Additional ropes were thrown at Isaac. A moment later, Isaac was also tied up, which made resistance more difficult. Wangan, looking at the captive's attempts to escape and laughing loudly, said that it was useless to even try, because this net was specially invented to catch martial arts masters. Once caught in this net, it became more difficult for the masters to use their strength. Then Wangan again addressed the guests and said that Mayor Yupyo had made a big mistake, because he learned late that his right hand and future son-in-law was plotting an uprising against the current government. But still, Yupyo shared this in detail with Wangan. Hand on heart, and addressing the public, the official asked if this was an example of true devotion to the kingdom of honorable. The bound Isaac became furious at these words. On his knees, he shouted that this was all nonsense. But the mayor, playing along with Wangana's lies, said that he was disappointed with Isaac. Yupa continued to say with contempt that for the sake of his own benefit and greed, the prisoner was ready to lead the country into a difficult situation, and added that last night his daughter told him everything. Further, the mayor said that not loving even himself, Isaac persistently demanded marriage in order to gain power. The warrior was shocked when he heard all these words. Yupa also said that he trusted him, but now he was only feeling anger because of such a betrayal. From the lies and resentment towards the mayor, Isaac clenched his hand tightly into a fist. Unconsciously making a fierce expression on his face, Isaac loudly shouted Yupyo's name, wanting to deal with him right now. Wangan spread his hands and said that this was the truth, but in order to force those gathered to be more vigilant, he stopped at these words. After a short pause, he continued by saying that right here and now, they would publicly execute Isaac. These words shocked the guests. Then an order followed, and something large on small wheels drove into the hall where the banquet was taking place. Several soldiers were dragging a platform on which a fire was burning and a huge cauldron stood. The water in the cauldron was already boiling. Jin Beck and Nenyun were surprised by the execution weapon they saw. Isaac was roughly dragged towards the cauldron. Having tied a rope to a high beam, two soldiers lifted the prisoner high above the cauldron. Looking down, hot steam hit Isaac's face. Without hiding his joy, Wangan announced that the criminal who planned the uprising should have received appropriate punishment and added that this would be a good example for everyone. Wangan waved his hand and ordered the rope to be released, after which Isak began to quickly fall into a cauldron of boiling water. While Wangan was happy about what was happening, Yupyo seemed to not want to participate in this and expressed hidden contempt for the official. Isaac was getting closer and closer to the hot water. Almost falling into the cauldron, Isaac could not believe that he would die like this. Suddenly, out of nowhere, several streams of blue energy appeared. The boiler seemed to explode, splashing hot water around. Opening their mouths wide, Jin Beck and Nenyun were surprised by such a surprise. Wangan was also surprised, but even more frightened. Hot water poured onto the guests standing nearby. Suddenly, a man with a sword appeared in front of Jin Beck and Nenyun. The guy examined the man carefully and recognized him. It was Han Dong, whose sword was covered in energy. He jumped up to Isaac, intending to rescue his friend while Wangan shouted something to the invader. With one deft blow, Han Dong cut the rope on which his comrade was suspended. Under the surprised glances of the guests, they sank to the floor together. Isaac was glad to see his friend. Concentrating the energy in his hands, Handun tried to break the network that was still shackling his comrade. Having made incredible efforts, he still managed to break the ropes. Wangan was angry at what he saw. He ordered the soldiers to catch the rebel and his assistant. The warriors rushed to carry out the order. Several fierce soldiers were already approaching. But Isaac was not looking at them. His target was the mayor Yupyo, who watched what was happening without emotion. Yupa noticed Isaac's gaze on himself and already understood that he was in trouble. Isaac calmly exhaled, trying to suppress unnecessary emotions and concentrate. Suddenly, a soldier appeared in front of him and seemed to pierce Isaac with a spear. But no, the experienced warrior was able to easily dodge this blow. With a firm hand, Isaac grabbed the spear. With one blow that literally cut through the air, he was able to deal with one of his opponents. The enemy, having flown some distance, was stopped by a wall. Everything happened so quickly that the mayor Yupe did not even have time to get scared. After that, Isaac began to very quickly spin the spear in his hand, cutting through the air around him. His eyes glowed green. Suddenly, he abruptly stopped the rotation of the spear, and he directed all the accumulated forces into the floor, causing a roar and dust to rise. Looking around with a stern look, Isaac concluded that since this had happened, he had no choice but to fight. The opponents, seeing Isaac's fighting spirit, were afraid to attack and continue the battle. Handun looked at his comrade and noticed that he had not seen him wielding a spear for a long time. Wangan continued to shout in fear that these were rebels. He displeasedly asked what his soldiers were doing and ordered an attack while his guard soldiers watched from the sidelines. One of them, stretching his hand, noticed that the situation was very funny. Two red-masked warrior guards finally decided to engage in battle. An ominous aura emanated from them. Khandun and Isaac were surrounded on all sides by soldiers who still did not dare to attack. Outraged by this, Wangan shouted and ordered everyone to attack. The soldiers finally rushed into battle, but Handun, undeterred by the numerical superiority, accepted the challenge. He deftly blocked his opponent's blows. Handun picked the right moment and dealt with the enemies with one back. Isaac also did not lag behind his friend, despite the fact that he only had a spear in his hands. These soldiers did not cause him any problems. After very little time, the last enemy fell. The comrades stood surrounded by the opponents they had defeated. Handong concluded that it was just a bunch of losers. Wangan was shocked by the ineffectiveness of his soldiers' attacks, and Yupyo remained just as calm but gloomy. Handong looked at the high-ranking official coldly. In an effort to achieve his goal as quickly as possible, he thought that he needed to kill Wangan while there was such an opportunity. Suddenly, a warrior in a red mask appeared behind him. Handong did not expect this. Time seemed to stand still. The guard warrior attacked Handun, but he managed to jump away at the very last moment. But the guard's speed was so great that he still managed to catch Handong a little. This made him a little nervous because he did not expect such strength from his opponent. Handong, in a rage, asked the man in the red mask who he was, but he did not answer, asking a counter question where he was going. In front of Handong stood two men in red masks. One told me that before going further with them, it would be right. Handong, without letting go of the sword, told him not to interfere and get lost. To this, the guard replied that this was impossible, because after all, he was a conscientious worker. Handun was thinking about something, but understood the inevitability of the battle. The guard's face was hidden by a red mask, so it was impossible to understand where he was looking and what he was feeling. Finally, Handong attacked his opponent with a cry and fury. They fought on equal terms and sent streams of red and blue energy at each other. The guard warrior deftly blocked all of Handong's attacks. This surprised him. Handong admitted that his opponent was strong and that he had underestimated him. Wangan was delighted with his guard, daring him to quickly cut Handong's throat. Yupa was still the same, without emotion. He silently looked at what was happening. Finally, he decided to leave the hall. Isaac noticed this and couldn't let it happen. Just as he intended to catch up with the mayor, someone blocked his path. The second warrior guard in a red mask invited Isaac to fight him. Isaac realized that in order to move on, he needed to accept this battle. Jin Beck and Nenyon continued to watch what was happening in surprise. The guy could not believe the reality of this fight. Nenyon understood why Tek Wangan, having paid a lot of money, hired professional warriors. It was all for the sake of the intrigues that he weaved. Then the girl said that these young people were incredible, but the red masks were an order of magnitude better. Jin Beck didn't understand why she said that. Nenyon, watching the fight, explained that the longer the fight goes on, the further they will fall behind, and wondered if they now felt like they were at a disadvantage. The excited Jin Beck couldn't believe it and felt sorry for Handuna. The girl asked if Jin Beck knew the man who was fighting with the guard in the red mask. The guy replied that he knew, because it was his teacher. Nenyon was frightened and could not believe that the fellow rebel was the teacher of her friend. Meanwhile, one of the guard warriors attacked his opponent with many knives charged with red energy. Isaac prepared to repel this attack. With great effort, it seemed that he could handle it because the knives were blocked one after another. But suddenly one of the knives almost reaches its target, bypassing the defense. This worried Isaac. He understood that his strength was running out. The guard soldiers still did not want to retreat, intending to continue the battle. They returned to their original positions again and again. One of the guards praised his opponent, saying that he was better than he thought. Isaac said that this battle was difficult, to which Khandun suggested using combined attacks. Isaac wasn't sure about this idea since it had been so long since they last used it, but Handong asked if his comrade had anything else to suggest. The warriors began to concentrate energy in their weapons. Green energy wrapped around Isaac's spear, and blue energy rushed towards Handun's sword. They continued to concentrate the energy until the entire space around them was filled, creating a single green-blue circle. Watching this, one of the warriors in a red mask laughingly said that their opponents were doing something interesting. The second one just watched silently with his hands folded on his chest. All preparations were completed and Isaac attacked the enemies with a blow of fate. A powerful charge of green energy rushed into the target in a single stream. At the same time, Handong attacked with a bloody dragon blow. Energy in the form of a blue dragon quickly shot towards the opponents. The guards were not impressed. One of them said that it was useless and that he could dodge even with his eyes closed. Suddenly, green and blue energies began to mix with each other. It looked like the blue dragon was wrapped around a green stream of energy. Now it was a single force. Approaching the target, the snake opened its mouth from which green energy gushed out. This attack was about to hit the opponents. One of the guards was surprised that the energies of his opponents combined into one attack. Jin Beck and Nenyon froze, waiting for the result of the attack. Wangan was afraid and tried to cover himself with his hand. Finally, there was a huge explosion and roar. The room was filled with green-blue light. After some time, everything calmed down. In the place where the guards stood there now lay a pile of stones. Isaac and Handun, having put their last strength into the attack, were now trying to catch their breath. For some time, they looked carefully at the pile of stones and listened in silence, not believing what they had achieved. Handun came closer to the stones because he thought that everything was over. Suddenly, a knife charged with red energy flew out of nowhere. He wounded Handong in the stomach. Blood gushed from the warrior's mouth. He no longer had the strength to hold his sword in his hand. Isaac was dumbfounded by what he saw. Jin Beck screamed in distress and pain. Handun fell to the floor. I didn't have the strength to resist. The warrior's sword fell next to him.